Section 1 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Options by O. Henry. The Rose of Dixie. When the Rose of Dixie magazine was started by a stock company in Toombs City, Georgia, there was never but one candidate for its chief editorial position in the minds of its owners. Colonel Aquila Telfair was the man for the place. By all the rights of learning, family, reputation, and Southern traditions, he was its foreordained, fit, and logical editor. So a committee of the patriotic Georgia citizens, who had subscribed the founding fund of $100,000, called upon Colonel Telfair at his residence, Cedar Heights, fearful lest the enterprise and the South should suffer by his possible refusal. The colonel received them in his great library, where he spent most of his days. The library had descended to him from his father. It contained 10,000 volumes, some of which had been published as late as the year 1861. When the deputation arrived, Colonel Telfair was seated at his massive white pine center table, reading Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. He arose and shook hands punctiliously with each member of the committee. If you were familiar with The Rose of Dixie, you will remember the colonel's portrait, which appeared in it from time to time. You could not forget the long, carefully brushed white hair, the hooked, high-bridged nose, slightly twisted to the left, the keen eyes under the still black eyebrows, the classic mouth beneath the drooping white mustache, slightly frazzled at the ends. The committee solicitously offered him the position of managing editor, humbly presenting an outline of the field that the publication was designed to cover, and mentioning a comfortable salary. The colonel's lands were growing poorer each year, and were much cut up by red gullies. Besides, the honor was not one to be refused. In a 40-minute speech of acceptance, Colonel Telfair gave an outline of English literature from Chaucer to Macaulay, refought the Battle of Chancellorsville, and said that, God helping him, he would so conduct The Rose of Dixie that its fragrance and beauty would permeate the entire world, hurling back into the teeth of the Northern minions their belief that no genius or good could exist in the brains and hearts of the people whose property they had destroyed and whose rights they had curtailed. Offices for the magazine were partitioned off and furnished in the second floor of the First National Bank building, and it was for the colonel to cause the Rose of Dixie to blossom and flourish, or to wilt in the balmy air of the land of flowers. The staff of assistants and contributors that editor Colonel Telfair drew about him was a peach. It was a whole crate of Georgia peaches. The first assistant editor, Tolliver Lee Fairfax, had had a father killed during Pickett's charge. The second assistant, Keats Unthank, was the nephew of one of Morgan's raiders. The book reviewer, Jackson Rockingham, had been the youngest soldier in the Confederate Army, having appeared on the field of battle with a sword in one hand and a milk bottle in the other. The art editor, Roncesvalles Sykes, was a third cousin to a nephew of Jefferson Davis. Miss Lavinia Terhune, the colonel's stenographer and typewriter, had an aunt who had once been kissed by Stonewall Jackson. Tommy Webster, the head office boy, got his job by having recited Father Ryan's poems, complete, at the commencement exercises of the Toombs City High School. The girls who wrapped and addressed the magazines were members of old Southern families in reduced circumstances. The cashier was a scrub named Hawkins from Ann Arbor, Michigan, who had recommendations and a bond from a guarantee company filed with the owners. Even Georgia stock companies sometimes realize that it takes live ones to bury the dead. Well, sir, if you believe me, the Rose of Dixie blossomed 5 times before anybody heard of it, except the people who buy their hooks and eyes in Toombs City. Then Hawkins climbed off his stool and told on 'em to the stock company. Even in Ann Arbor he had been used to having his business propositions heard of at least as far away as Detroit. So an advertising manager was engaged, Beauregard Fitzhugh Banks, a young man in a lavender necktie, whose grandfather had been the exalted high pillow-slip of the Ku Klux Klan. In spite of which, the Rose of Dixie kept coming out every month, although in every issue it ran photos of either the Taj Mahal or the Luxembourg Gardens or Carmencita of La Follette. A certain number of people bought it and subscribed for it. As a boom for it, editor Colonel Telfair ran 3 different views of Andrew Jackson's old home, the Hermitage, a full-page engraving of the Second Battle of Manassas, entitled Lee to the Rear, and a 5,000-word biography of Belle Boyd in the same number. The subscription list that month advanced 118. Also, there were poems in the same issue by Leonina Vashti Harakat, pen name, related to the Harakats of Charleston, South Carolina, and Bill Thompson, nephew of one of the stockholders, and an article from a special society correspondent describing a tea party given by the swell Boston and English set, where a lot of tea was spilled overboard by some of the guests masquerading as Indians. One day a person whose breath would easily cloud a mirror, he was so much alive, entered the office of the Rose of Dixie. He was a man about the size of a real estate agent, with a self-tied tie and a manner that he must have borrowed conjointly from W. J. Bryan, Hackenschmidt, and Hetty Green. He was shown into the editor colonel's Ponce Asinorum. Colonel Telfair rose and began a Prince Albert bow. "I'm Thacker," said the intruder, taking the editor's chair. "T.T. Thacker of New York." He dribbled hastily upon the colonel's desk some cards, a bulky manila envelope, and a letter from the owners of the Rose of Dixie. This letter introduced Mr. Thacker, and politely requested Colonel Telfair to give him a conference and whatever information about the magazine he might desire. "I've been corresponding with the secretary of the magazine owners for some time," said Thacker briskly. "I am a practical magazine man myself, and a circulation booster as good as any, if I do say it. I'll guarantee an increase of anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 a year for any publication that isn't printed in a dead language. I've had my eye on the Rose of Dixie ever since it started. I know every end of the business, from editing to setting up the classified ads. Now, I've come down here to put a good bunch of money in the magazine, if I can see my way clear. It ought to be made to pay. The secretary tells me it's losing money. I don't see why a magazine in the South, if it's properly handled, shouldn't get a good circulation in the North, too." Colonel Telfair leaned back in his chair and polished his gold-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Thacker," said he, courteously but firmly, "the Rose of Dixie is a publication devoted to the fostering and the voicing of Southern genius. Its watchword, which you may have seen on the cover, is 'Of, for, and by the South.'" "But you wouldn't object to a Northern circulation, would you?" asked Thacker. "I suppose," said the editor colonel, "that it is customary to open the circulation lists to all. I do not know. I have nothing to do with the business affairs of the magazine. I was called upon to assume editorial control of it, and I have devoted to its conduct such poor literary talents as I may possess, and whatever store of erudition I may have acquired." "Sure," said Thacker, "but a dollar is a dollar anywhere, north, south, or west, whether you're buying codfish, goober peas, or Rocky Ford cantaloupes. Now, I've been looking over your November number. I see one here on your desk. You don't mind running over it with me? Well, your leading article is all right. A good write-up of the Cotton Belt with plenty of photographs is a winner any time. New York is always interested in the cotton crop. And this sensational account of the Hatfield-McCoy feud by a schoolmate of a niece of the governor of Kentucky isn't such a bad idea. It happened so long ago that most people have forgotten it. Now, here's a poem 3 pages long called 'The Tyrant's Foot' by Lorella Lascelles. I've pawed around a good deal over manuscripts, but I never saw her name on a rejection slip." "Miss Lascelles," said the editor, "is one of our most widely recognized Southern poetesses. She is closely related to the Alabama Lascelles family, and made with her own hands the silken Confederate banner that was presented to the governor of that state at his inauguration." "But why," persisted Thacker, "is the poem illustrated with the view of the M&O Railroad freight depot at Tuscaloosa?" "The illustration," said the Colonel with dignity, "shows a corner of the fence surrounding the old homestead where Miss Michaelides was born." "All right," said Thacker. "I read the poem, but I couldn't tell whether it was about the depot of the Battle of Bull Run. Now, here's a short story called Rosie's Temptation by Fosdyke Piggott. It's rotten. What is a Piggott, anyway?" "Mr. Piggott," said the editor, "is a brother of the principal stockholder of the magazine." "All's right with the world. Piggott passes," said Thacker. "Well, this article on Arctic exploration and the one on tarpon fishing might go, but how about this write-up of the Atlanta, New Orleans, Nashville, and Savannah breweries? It seems to consist mainly of statistics about their output and the quality of their beer. What's the chip over the bug?" "If I understand your figurative language," answered Colonel Telfair, "it is this. The article you refer to was handed to me by the owners of the magazine with instructions to publish it. The literary quality of it did not appeal to me, but in a measure I feel impelled to conform, in certain matters, to the wishes of the gentlemen who are interested in the financial side of the Rose." "I see," said Thacker. "Next we have 2 pages of selections from Lalla Rookh by Thomas More. Now, what federal prison did More escape from, or what's the name of the FFV family that he carries as a handicap?" "More was an Irish poet who died in 1852, said Colonel Telfair, pityingly. "He is a classic. I have been thinking of reprinting his translation of Anacreon serially in the magazine." "Look out for the copyright laws," said Thacker flippantly. "Who's Bessie Belclair, who contributes the essay on the newly completed waterworks plant in Milledgeville?" "The name, sir," said Colonel Telfair, "is the nom de guerre of Miss Elvira Simpkins. I have not the honor of knowing the lady, but her contribution was sent to us by Congressman Brower of her native state. Congressman Brower's mother was related to the Polks of Tennessee." "Now, see here, Colonel," said Thacker, throwing down the magazine. "This won't do. You can't successfully run a magazine for one particular section of the country. You've got to make a universal appeal. Now, look how the Northern publications have catered to the South and encouraged Southern writers. And you've got to go far and wide for your contributors. You've got to buy stuff according to its quality, without any regard to the pedigree of the author. Now, I'll bet a quart of ink that this Southern parlor organ you've been running has never played a note that originated above the Mason and Hamlin's line. Am I right?" "I have carefully and conscientiously rejected all contributions from that section of the country, if I understand your figurative language aright," replied the Colonel. "All right, now I'll show you something." Thacker reached for his thick manila envelope and dumped a mass of typewritten manuscript on the editor's desk. "Here's some truck," said he, "that I paid cash for and brought along with me." One by one he folded back the manuscripts and showed the first pages to the Colonel. "Here are 4 stories by 4 of the highest priced authors in the United States, 3 of 'em living in New York and 1 commuting. There's a special article on Vienna Bread Society by Tom Vampson. Here's an Italian serial by Captain Jack. No, it's the other Crawford. Here are 3 separate exposés of city governments by Sniffings, and here's a dandy entitled What Women Carry in Dress Suitcases. A Chicago newspaper woman hired herself out for 5 years as a lady's maid to get that information. And here's a synopsis of preceding chapters of Hall Caine's new serial to appear next June. And here's a couple of pounds of vers de société that I got at a rate from the clever magazines. That's the stuff that people everywhere want. And now here's a write-up with photographs at the ages of 4, 12, 22, and 30 of George B. McClellan. It's a prognostication. He's bound to be elected mayor of New York. It'll make a big hit all over the country. "I beg your pardon," said Colonel Telfair, stiffening in his chair. "What was the name?" "Oh, I see," said Thacker with a half grin. "Yes, he's a son of the general. We'll pass that manuscript up. But if you'll excuse me, Colonel, it's a magazine we're trying to make go of, not the first gun at Fort Sumter. Now, here's a thing that's bound to get next to you. It's an original poem by James Whitcomb Riley, J.W. himself. You know what that means to a magazine. I won't tell you what I had to pay for that poem, but I'll tell you this. Riley can make more money writing with a fountain pen than you or I with one that lets the ink run. I'll read you the last 2 stanzas. Pa lays around and loafs all day, and reads and makes us leave him be. He lets me do just like I please, and when I'm bad he laughs at me. And when I holler loud and say bad words and then begin to tease the cat, and Pa just smiles, Ma's mad and gives me Jessie crossed her knees. I always wondered why that was. I guess it's 'cause Pa never does. And after all the lights are out, I'm sorry about it. So I creep out of my trundle bed to Ma's and say I love her a whole heap, and kiss her, and I hug her tight, and it's too dark to see her eyes, but every time I do I know she cries and cries and cries and cries. I always wondered why that was. I guess it's 'cause Pa never does. That's the stuff, continued Thacker. What do you think of that? I am not unfamiliar with the works of Mr. Riley, said the Colonel deliberately. I believe he lives in Indiana. For the last 10 years I have been somewhat of a literary recluse, and am familiar with nearly all the books in the Cedar Heights Library. I am also of the opinion that a magazine should contain a certain amount of poetry. Many of the sweetest singers of the South have already contributed to the pages of The Rose of Dixie. I myself have thought of translating from the original for publication in its pages the works of the great Italian poet Tasso. Have you ever drunk from the fountain of this immortal poet's lines, Mr. Thacker? Not even a demi-Tasso, said Thacker. Now let's come to the point, Colonel Telfair. I've already invested some money in this as a flyer. That bunch of manuscripts cost me $4,000. My object was to try a number of them in the next issue. I believe you make up less than a month ahead, and see what effect it has on the circulation. I believe that by printing the best stuff we can get in the North, South, East, or West, we can make the magazine go. You have there the letter from the owning company asking you to cooperate with me in this plan. Let's chuck out some of this slush that you've been publishing, just because the writers are related to the Scoop Doodles of Scoop Doodle County. Are you with me? As long as I continue to be the editor of the Rose, said Colonel Telfair with dignity, I shall be its editor. But I desire also to conform to the wishes of its owners, if I can do so conscientiously. That's the talk, said Thacker briskly. Now, how much of this stuff I've brought can we get into the January number? We want to begin right away. There is yet space in the January number, said the editor, for about 8,000 words, roughly estimated. Great, said Thacker. It isn't much, but it'll give the readers some change from Goobers, Governors, and Gettysburg. I'll leave the selection of the stuff I brought to fill the space to you, as it's all good. I've got to run back to New York, and I'll be down again in a couple of weeks. Colonel Telfair slowly swung his eyeglasses by their broad black ribbon. The space in the January number that I referred to, said he, measuredly, has been held open purposely, pending a decision that I have not yet made. A short time ago a contribution was submitted to the Rose of Dixie that is one of the most remarkable literary efforts that has ever come under my observation. None but a mastermind and talent could have produced it. It would just fill the space that I have reserved for its possible use. Thacker looked anxious. What kind of stuff is it? He asked. 8,000 words sounds suspicious. The oldest families must have been collaborating. Is there going to be another secession? The author of the article, continued the Colonel, ignoring Thacker's allusions, is a writer of some reputation. He has also distinguished himself in other ways. I do not feel at liberty to reveal to you his name, at least not until I have decided whether or not to accept his contribution. Well, said Thacker nervously, is it a continued story, or an account of the unveiling of the new town pump in Whitmore, South Carolina, or a revised list of General Lee's body servants, or what? You are disposed to be facetious, said Colonel Telfair calmly. The article is from the pen of a thinker, a philosopher, a lover of mankind, a student and a rhetorician of high degree." "It must have been written by a syndicate," said Thacker. "But honestly, Colonel, you want to go slow. I don't know of any 8,000-word single doses of written matter that are read by anybody these days, except Supreme Court briefs and the reports of murder trials. You haven't by any accident gotten hold of a copy of one of Daniel Webster's speeches, have you?" Colonel Telfair swung a little in his chair and looked steadily from under his bushy eyebrows at the magazine promoter. "Mr. Thacker," he said gravely, "I am willing to segregate that somewhat crude expression of your sense of humor from the solicitude that your business investments undoubtedly have conferred upon you. But I must ask you to cease your jibes and derogatory comments upon the South and the Southern people. They, sir, will not be tolerated in the office of the Rose of Dixie for one moment. And before you proceed with more of your covert insinuations that I, the editor of this magazine, am not a competent judge of the merits of the matter submitted to its consideration, I beg that you will first present some evidence or proof that you are my superior in any way, shape, or form relative to the question in hand." "Oh, come, Colonel," said Thacker good-naturedly, "I didn't do anything like that to you. It sounds like an indictment by the 4th Assistant Attorney General. Let's get back to business. What's this 8,000 to 1 shot about?" "The article," said Colonel Telfair, acknowledging the apology by a slight bow, "covers a wide area of knowledge. It takes up theories and questions that have puzzled the world for centuries, and disposes of them logically and concisely. One by one it holds up to view the evils of the world, points out the way of eradicating them, and then conscientiously and in detail commends the good. There is hardly a phase of human life that it does not discuss wisely, calmly, and equitably. The great policies of governments, the duties of private citizens, the obligations of home life, law, ethics, morality, all these important subjects are handled with a calm wisdom and confidence that I must confess has captured my admiration." "It must be a crackerjack," said Thacker, impressed. "It is a great contribution to the world's wisdom," said the Colonel. "The only doubt remaining in my mind as to the tremendous advantage it would be to us to give it publication in the Rose of Dixie is that I have not yet sufficient information about the author to give his work publicity in our magazine." "I thought you said he is a distinguished man," said Thacker. "He is," replied the Colonel, "both in literary and in other more diversified and extraneous fields. But I am extremely careful about the matter that I accept for publication. My contributors are people of unquestionable repute and connections, which fact can be verified at any time. As I said, I am holding this article until I can acquire more information about its author. I do not know whether I will publish it or not. If I decide against it, I shall be much pleased, Mr. Thacker, to substitute the matter that you are leaving with me in its place." Thacker was somewhat at sea. "I don't seem to gather," said he, "much about the gist of this inspired piece of literature. It sounds more like a dark horse than Pegasus to me." "It is a human document," said the Colonel Editor confidently, "from a man of great accomplishments, who, in my opinion, has obtained a stronger grasp on the world and its outcomes than that of any man living to-day." Thacker rose to his feet excitedly. "Say," he said, "it isn't possible that you've cornered John D. Rockefeller's memoirs, is it? Don't tell me that all at once." "No, sir," said Colonel Telfair. "I am speaking of mentality and literature, not of less worthy intricacies of trade." "Well, what's the trouble about running the article?" asked Thacker a little impatiently. "If the man's well known and has got the stuff." Colonel Telfair sighed. "Mr. Thacker," said he, "for once I have been tempted. Nothing has yet appeared in the Rose of Dixie that has not been from the pen of one of its sons or daughters. I know little about the author of this article, except that he has acquired prominence in a section of the country that has always been inimical to my heart and mind. But I recognize his genius, and as I have told you, I have instituted an investigation of his personality. Perhaps it will be futile, but I shall pursue the inquiry. Until that is finished, I must leave open the question of filling the vacant space in our January number." Thacker arose to leave. "All right, Colonel," he said, as cordially as he could. "You use your own judgment. If you've really got a scoop or something that will make 'em sit up, run it instead of my stuff. I'll drop in again in about 2 weeks. Good luck." Colonel Telfair and the magazine promoter shook hands. Returning a fortnight later, Thacker dropped off a very rocky Pullman at Toombs City. He found the January number of the magazine made up and the forms closed. The vacant space that had been yawning for type was filled by an article that was headed thus: "Second Message to Congress, written for the Rose of Dixie by a member of the well-known Bullock family of Georgia, T. Roosevelt." End of The Rose of Dixie.
Section 2 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ed Humple. Options by O. Henry. The Third Ingredient. The so-called Vallombrosa apartment house is not an apartment house. It is composed of 2 old-fashioned brownstone front residences welded into one. The parlor floor of one side is gay with the wraps and headgear of a modiste. The other is lugubrious with the sophistical promises and grisly display of a painless dentist. You may have a room there for $2 a week, or you may have one for $20. Among the Vallombrosa's roomers are stenographers, musicians, brokers, shopgirls, space rate writers, art students, wiretappers, and other people who lean far over the banister rail when the doorbell rings. This treatise shall have to do with but 2 of the Vallombrosians, though meaning no disrespect to the others. At 6 o'clock one afternoon, Hetty Pepper came back to her third-floor rear $3.50 room in the Vallombrosa with her nose and chin more sharply pointed than usual. To be discharged from the department store where you have been working for 4 years, and with only 15 cents in your purse, does have a tendency to make your features appear more finely chiseled. And now for Hetty's thumbnail biography, while she climbs the 2 flights of stairs. She walked into the biggest store one morning 4 years before, with 75 other girls applying for a job behind the waste department counter. The phalanx of wage earners formed a bewildering scene of beauty, carrying a total mass of blonde hair sufficient to have justified the horseback gallops of 100 Lady Godivas. The capable, cool-eyed, impersonal, young, bald-headed man whose task it was to engage 6 of the contestants was aware of a feeling of suffocation as if he were drowning in a sea of frangipani, while white clouds, hand-embroidered, floated about him. And then a sail hove in sight. Hetty Pepper, homely of countenance, with small, contemptuous green eyes and chocolate-colored hair, dressed in a suit of plain burlap and a common-sense hat, stood before him with every one of her 29 years of life unmistakably in sight. "You're on!" shouted the bald-headed young man, and was saved. And that is how Hetty came to be employed in the biggest store. The story of her rise to an $8 a week salary is the combined stories of Hercules, Joan of Arc, Una, Job, and Little Red Riding Hood. You shall not learn from me the salary that was paid her as a beginner. There is a sentiment growing about such things, and I want no millionaire shop proprietors climbing the fire escape of my tenement house to throw dynamite bombs into my skylight boudoir. The story of Hetty's discharge from the biggest store is so nearly a repetition of her engagement as to be monotonous. In each department of the store there is an omniscient, omnipresent, and omnivorous person carrying a mileage book and a red necktie, and referred to as a buyer. The destinies of the girls in his department who live on, see Bureau of Victual Statistics, so much per week are in his hands. This particular buyer was a capable, cool-eyed, impersonal, young, bald-headed man. As he walked along the aisles of his department he seemed to be sailing on a sea of frangipani, while white clouds, machine-embroidered, floated above him. Too many sweets bring surfeit. He looked upon Hetty Pepper's homely countenance, emerald eyes, and chocolate-covered hair as a welcome oasis of green in a desert of cloying beauty. In a quiet angle of a counter he pinched her arm, kindly, 3 inches above the elbow. She slapped him 3 feet away with one good blow of her muscular and not especially lily-white right. So now you know why Hetty Pepper came to leave the biggest store at 30 minutes' notice, with 1 dime and a nickel in her purse. This morning's quotations list the price of rib beef at 6 cents per butcher's pound. But on the day that Hetty was released by the B.S., the price was 7 1/2 cents. That fact is what makes this story possible. Otherwise, the extra 4 cents would have... But the plot of nearly all the good stories in the world is concerned with shorts who were unable to cover, so you can find no fault with this one. Hetty mounted with her rib beef to her $3.50 third floor back. 1 hot, savory beef stew for supper, a good night's sleep, and she would be fit in the morning to apply again for the tasks of Hercules, Joan of Arc, Una, Job, and Little Red Riding Hood. In her room she got the granite ware stew pan out of the 2x4 china, earthenware closet, and began to dig down in a rat's nest of paper bags for the potatoes and onions. She came out with her nose and chin just a little sharper pointed. There was neither a potato nor an onion. Now, what kind of beef stew can you make out of simply beef? You can make oyster soup without oysters, turtle soup without turtles, coffee cake without coffee, but you can't make beef stew without potatoes and onions. But rib beef alone, in an emergency, can make an ordinary pine door look like a wrought iron gambling house portal to the wolf. With salt and pepper and a tablespoonful of flour, first well stirred in a little cold water, 'twill serve. 'Tis not so deep as a lobster a la Newburgh, nor so wide as a church festival doughnut, but 'twill serve. Hetty took her stewpan to the rear of the third floor hall. According to the advertisements of the Vallambrosia, there was running water to be found there. Between you and me and the water meter, it only ambled or walked through the faucets, but technicalities have no place here. There was also a sink, where housekeeping roomers often met to dump their coffee grounds and glare at one another's kimonos. At this sink Hetty found a girl with heavy, gold-brown artistic hair and plaintive eyes, washing 2 large Irish potatoes. Hetty knew the Vallambrosia as well as anyone not owning double hextra magnifying eyes could compass its mysteries. The kimonos were her encyclopedia, her who's what, her clearinghouse of news of goers and comers. From a rose-pink kimono, edged with Nile green, she had learned that the girl with the potatoes was a miniature painter, living in a kind of attic, or studio as they prefer to call it, on the top floor. Hetty was not certain in her mind what a miniature was, but it certainly wasn't a house, because house painters, although they wear splashy overalls and poke ladders in your face on the street, are known to indulge in a riotous profusion of food at home. The potato girl was quite slim and small, and handled her potatoes as an old bachelor uncle handles a baby who is cutting teeth. She had a dull shoemaker's knife in her right hand, and she had begun to peel one of the potatoes with it. Hetty addressed her in the punctiliously formal tone of one who intends to be cheerfully familiar with you in the second round. "Beg pardon," she said, "for butting into what's not my business, but if you peel them potatoes you lose out. They're new Bermudas. You want to scrape 'em. Let me show you." She took a potato and the knife, and began to demonstrate. "Oh, thank you," breathed the artist. "I didn't know. And I did hate to see the thick peeling go. It seemed like such a waste. But I thought they always had to be peeled. When you've got only potatoes to eat, the peelings count, you know." "Say, kid," said Hetty, staying her knife, "you ain't up against it too, are you?" The miniature artist smiled starvedly. "I suppose I am. Art, or at least the way I interpret it, doesn't seem to be much in demand. I have only these potatoes for my dinner, but they aren't so bad boiled and hot, with a little butter and salt." "Child," said Hetty, letting her brief smile soften her rigid features, "fate has sent me and you together. I've had it handed to me in the neck too. but I've got a chunk of meat in my room as big as a lapdog. And I've done everything to get potatoes except pray for 'em. Let's me and you bunch our commissary departments and make a stew of 'em. We'll cook it in my room. If we only had an onion to go with it. Say, kid, you haven't got a couple of pennies that have slipped down into the lining of your last winter's sealskin, have you? I could step down to the corner and get one at old Giuseppe's stand. A stew without an onion is worse than a matinee without candy. You may call me Cecilia, said the artist. No, I spent my last penny 3 days ago. Then we'll have to cut the onion out instead of slicing it in, said Hetty. I'd ask the janitress for one, but I don't want 'em hep yet to the fact that I'm pounding the asphalt for another job. But I wish we did have an onion. In the shopgirl's room, the two began to prepare their supper. Cecilia's part was to sit on the couch helplessly, and beg to be allowed to do something, in the voice of a cooing ring dove. Hetty prepared the rib beef, putting it in cold salted water in the stewpan, and setting it on the 1-burner gas stove. I wish we had an onion, said Hetty, as she scraped the 2 potatoes. On the wall opposite the couch was pinned a flaming gorgeous advertising picture of one of the new ferry boats of the PUFF Railroad that had been built to cut down the time between Los Angeles and New York City 1/8 of a minute. Hetty, turning her head during her continuous monologue, saw tears running from her guest's eyes as she gazed on the idealized presentiment of the speeding, foam-girdled transport. Why, say, Cecilia, kid, said Hetty, poising her knife, is that as bad art as that? I ain't a critic, but I thought it kind of brightened up the room. Of course, a manicure painter could tell it was a bum picture in a minute. I'll take it down if you say so. I wish to the holy Saint Potluck we had an onion. But the miniature painter had tumbled down, sobbing, with her nose indenting the hard-woven drapery of the couch. Something was here deeper than the artistic temperament offended at crude lithography. Hetty knew. She had accepted her role long ago. How scant the words with which we try to describe a single quality of a human being. When we reach the abstract, we are lost. The nearer to nature that the babbling of our lips comes, the better do we understand. Figuratively, let us say, some people are bosoms, some are hands, some are heads, some are muscles, some are feet, some are backs for burdens. Hetty was a shoulder. Hers was a sharp, sinewy shoulder, but all her life people had laid their heads upon it, metaphorically or actually, and had left there all or half their troubles. Looking at life anatomically, which is as good a way as any, she was preordained to be a shoulder. There were few truer collarbones anywhere than hers. Hetty was only 33, and she had not yet outlived the little pang that visited her whenever the head of youth and beauty leaned upon her for consolation. But one glance in her mirror always served as an instantaneous painkiller. So she gave one pale look into the crinkly, old-looking glass on the wall above the gas stove, turned down the flame a little lower from the bubbling beef and potatoes, went over to the couch, and lifted Cecilia's head to its confessional. Go and tell me, honey, she said. I know now that it ain't art that's worrying you. You met him on a ferry boat, didn't you? Go on, Cecilia, kid, and tell your Aunt Hetty all about it. But youth and melancholy must first spend the surplus of sighs and tears that waft and float the bark of romance to its harbor in the delectable isles. Presently, through the stringy tendons that formed the bars of the confessional, the penitent, or was it the glorified communicant of the sacred flame, told her story without art or illumination. It was only 3 days ago. I was coming back on the ferry from Jersey City. Old Mr. Shrum, an art dealer, told me of a rich man in Newark who wanted a miniature of his daughter painted. I went to see him and showed him some of my work. When I told him the price would be $50, he laughed at me like a hyena. He said an enlarged crayon 20 times the size would cost him only $8. I had just enough money to buy my ferry ticket back to New York. I felt as if I didn't want to live another day. I must have looked as I felt, for I saw him on the row of seats opposite me, looking at me as if he understood. He was a nice looking, but oh, above everything else, he looked kind. When one is tired or unhappy or hopeless, kindness counts more than anything else. When I got so miserable that I couldn't fight against it any longer, I got up and walked slowly out the rear door of the ferry boat cabin. No one was there, and I slipped quickly over the rail and dropped into the water. Oh, friend Hetty, it was cold, cold. For just one moment I wished I was back in the old Vallambrosia, starving and hoping, and then I got numb and didn't care. And then I felt that somebody else was in the water close by me, holding me. He had followed me and jumped in to save me. Somebody threw a thing like a big white doughnut at us, and he made me put my arms through the hole. Then the ferry boat backed, and they pulled us on board. Oh, Hetty, I was so ashamed of my wickedness in trying to drown myself, and besides my hair had all tumbled down and was sopping wet, and I was such a sight. And then some men in blue clothes came around, and he gave them his card. And I heard him tell them he had seen me drop my purse by the edge of the boat outside the rail, and in leaning over to get it I had fallen overboard. And then I remembered having read in the papers that people who try to kill themselves are locked up in cells with people who try to kill other people, and I was afraid. But some ladies on the boat took me downstairs to the furnace room and got me nearly dry and did up my hair. When the boat landed, he came and put me in a cab. He was all dripping himself, but laughed as if he thought it was all a joke. He begged me, but I wouldn't tell him my name, nor where I lived. I was so ashamed. You were a fool, child, said Hetty, kindly. Wait till I turn up the light a bit. I wish to heaven we had an onion. Then he raised his hat, went on Cecilia, and said, Very well, but I'll find you somehow. I'm going to claim my rights of salvage. And then he gave money to the cab driver and told him to take me where I wanted to go, and walked away. What is salvage, Hetty? The edge of a piece of goods that ain't hemmed, said the shop girl. You must have looked pretty well frazzled out to the little hero boy. It's been 3 days, moaned the miniature painter, and he hasn't found me yet. Extend the time, said Hetty. This is a big town. Think of how many girls he might have to see soaked in water with their hair down before he would recognize you. The stew's getting on fine, but oh, for an onion! I'd even use a piece of garlic if I had it. The beef and potatoes bubbled merrily, exhaling a mouth-watering savor that yet lacked something, leaving a hunger on the palate, a haunting, wistful desire for some lost and needful ingredient. I came near to drowning in that awful river, said Cecilia, shuddering. It ought to have more water in it, said Hetty. The stew, I mean. I'll go get some at the sink. It smells good, said the artist. That nasty old North River, objected Hetty. It smells to me like soap factories and wet setter dogs. Oh, you mean the stew. Well, I wish we had an onion for it. Did he look like he had money? First, he looked kind, said Cecilia. I'm sure he was rich, but that matters so little. When he drew out his bill folder to pay the cabman, you couldn't help seeing hundreds and thousands of dollars in it. And I looked over the cab doors and saw him leave the ferry station in a motor car, and the chauffeur gave him his bearskin to put on, for he was sopping wet, and it was only 3 days ago. What a fool, said Hetty, shortly. Oh, the chauffeur wasn't wet, breathed Cecilia, and he drove the car away very nicely. I mean you, said Hetty, for not giving him your address. I never give my address to chauffeurs, said Cecilia haughtily. I wish we had one, said Hetty, disconsolately. What for? For the stew, of course. Oh, I mean an onion. Hetty took a pitcher and started to the sink at the end of the hall. A young man came down the stairs from above, just as she was opposite the lower step. He was decently dressed, but pale and haggard. His eyes were dull with the stress of some burden of physical or mental woe. In his hand he bore an onion, a pink, smooth, solid, shining onion, as large around as a 98-cent alarm clock. Hetty stopped. So did the young man. There was something Joan of Arc-ish, Herculean, and Una-ish in the look and pose of the shop lady. She had cast off the roles of Job and Little Red Riding Hood. The young man stopped at the foot of the stairs and coughed distractedly. He felt marooned, held up, attacked, assailed, levied upon, sacked, assessed, panhandled, browbeaten, though he knew not why. It was the look in Hetty's eyes that did it. In them he saw the Jolly Roger fly to the masthead, and an able seaman with a dirk between his teeth scurry up the ratlines and nail it there. But as yet he did not know that the cargo he carried was the thing that had caused him to be so nearly blown out of the water without even a parley. "Beg your pardon," said Hetty, as sweetly as her dilute acidic tones permitted, "but did you find that onion on the stairs? There was a hole in the paper bag, and I've just come out to look for it." The young man coughed for half a minute. The interval may have given him the courage to defend his own property. Also he clutched the pungent prize greedily, and with a show of spirit faced his grim waylayer. "No," he said huskily, "I didn't find it on the stairs. It was given to me by Jack Bevins on the top floor. If you don't believe it, ask him, and I'll wait until you do." "I know Bevins," said Hetty, sourly. "He writes books and things up there for the paper and rags man. We can hear the postman guy him all over the house when he brings them thick envelopes back. Say, do you live in the Vallambrosa?" "I do not," said the young man. "I come to see Bevins sometimes. He's my friend. I live 2 blocks west." "What are you going to do with the onion?" "Begging your pardon," said Hetty. "I'm going to eat it." "Raw?" "Yes, as soon as I get home." "Haven't you got anything else to eat with it?" The young man considered briefly. "No," he confessed. "There's not another scrap of anything in my diggings to eat. I think old Jack is pretty hard up for grub in his shack, too. He hated to give up the onion, but I worried him into parting with it." "Man," said Hetty, fixing him with her world sapient eyes, and laying a bony but impressive finger on his sleeve, "you've known trouble, too, haven't you?" "Lots," said the onion owner promptly. "But this onion is my own property, honestly come by. If you will excuse me, I must be going." "Listen," said Hetty, paling a little with anxiety. "Raw onion is a mighty poor diet, and so is a beef stew without one. Now, if you're Jack Bevan's friend, I guess you're nearly right. And there's a little lady, a friend of mine, in my room there at the end of the hall. Both of us are out of luck, and we just had potatoes and meat between us. They're stewing now. But it ain't got any soul. There's something lacking in it. There's certain things in life are naturally intended to fit and belong together. One is pink cheesecloth and green roses, and one is ham and eggs, and one is Irish in trouble, and the other is beef and potatoes with onions. Still another is people who are up against it, and other people in the same fix." The young man went into a protracted paroxysm of coughing. With one hand he hugged his onion to his bosom. No doubt," said he at length. "But as I said, I must be going, because—" Hetty clutched his sleeve firmly. "Don't be a dago, little brother. Don't eat raw onions. Chip it in toward the dinner, and line yourself inside with the best stew you ever licked a spoon over. Must 2 ladies knock a young gentleman down and drag him inside for the honor of dining with them? No harm shall befall you, little brother. Loosen up and fall into line." The young man's pale face relaxed into a grin. "I believe I'll go," he said, brightening. "If my onion is good as a credential, I'll accept the invitation gladly." "It's good as that, but better as seasoning," said Hetty. "You come and stand outside the door till I ask my lady friend if she has any objections. And don't run away with that letter of recommendation before I come out." Hetty went into her room and closed the door. The young man waited outside. "Cecilia, kid," said the shop girl, oiling the sharp saw of her voice as well as she could, "there's an onion outside, with a young man attached. I've asked him in to dinner. You ain't going to kick, are you?" "Oh, dear," said Cecilia, sitting up and patting her artistic hair. She cast a mournful glance at the ferryboat poster on the wall. "Nit," said Hetty. "It ain't him. You're up against real life now. I believe you said your hero friend had money in automobiles." This is a poor skeezix that's got nothing to eat but an onion. But he's easy spoken and not a freshie. I imagine he's been a gentleman, he's so low down now. And we need the onion. Shall I bring him in? I'll guarantee his behavior. Hetty, dear, sighed Cecilia, I'm so hungry. What difference does it make whether he's a prince or a burglar? I don't care. Bring him in, if he's got anything to eat with him. Hetty went back into the hall. The onion man was gone. Her heart missed a beat, and a gray look settled over her face except on her nose and cheekbones. Then the tides of life flowed in again, for she saw him leaning out the front window at the other end of the hall. She hurried there. He was shouting to someone below. The noise of the street overpowered the sound of her footsteps. She looked down over his shoulder, saw whom he was speaking to, and heard his words. He pulled himself in from the window sill and saw her standing over him. Hetty's eyes bored into him like two steel gimlets. Don't lie to me, she said calmly. What were you going to do with that onion? The young man suppressed a cough and faced her resolutely. His manner was of one who had been bearded sufficiently. I was going to eat it, said he, with emphatic slowness, just as I told you before. And you have nothing else to eat at home? Not a thing. What kind of work do you do? I'm not working at anything just now. Then why, said Hetty, with her voice set on its sharpest edge, do you lean out of windows and give orders to chauffeurs in green automobiles in the street below? The young man flushed, and his dull eyes began to sparkle. Because, madam, said he, in accelerando tones, I pay the chauffeur's wages, and I own the automobile, and also this onion. This onion, madam! He flourished the onion within an inch of Hetty's nose. The shop lady did not retreat a hair's breadth. Then why do you eat onions? She said, with biting contempt, and nothing else. I never said I did, retorted the young man heatedly. I said I had nothing else to eat where I live. I am not a delicatessen storekeeper. Then why, pursued Hetty inflexibly, were you going to eat a raw onion? My mother, said the young man, always made me eat one for a cold. Pardon my referring to a physical infirmity, but you may have noticed that I have a very, very severe cold. I was going to eat the onion and go to bed. I wonder why I am standing here and apologizing to you for it. How did you catch this cold? Went on Hetty suspiciously. The young man seemed to have arrived at some extreme height of feeling. There were two modes of descent open to him, a burst of rage or a surrender to the ridiculous. He chose wisely, and the empty hall echoed his hoarse laughter. You're a dandy, said he, and I don't blame you for being careful. I don't mind telling you I got wet. I was on a North River ferry a few days ago when a girl jumped overboard. Of course Hetty extended her hand, interrupting his story. Give me the onion, she said. The young man set his jaw a trifle harder. Give me the onion, she repeated. He grinned and laid it in her hand. Then Hetty's infrequent, grim, melancholy smile showed itself. She took the young man's arm and pointed with her other hand to the door of her room. Little brother, she said, go in there. The little fool you fished out of the river is there waiting for you. Go on in. I'll give you 3 minutes before I come. Potatoes is in there waiting. Go on in, onions. After he had tapped at the door and entered, Hetty began to peel and wash the onion at the sink. She gave a gray look at the gray roofs outside, and the smile on her face vanished by little jerks and twitches. But it's us, she said grimly to herself. It's us that furnished the beef. End of The Third Ingredient by O. Henry.
Section 3 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Aaron Walsh, Omaha, Nebraska. Options by O. Henry. The Hiding of Black Bill. A lank, strong, red-faced man with a Wellington beak and small fiery eyes tempered by flaxen lashes sat on the station platform at Los Pinos, swinging his legs to and fro. At his side sat another man, fat, melancholy, and seedy, who seemed to be his friend. They had the appearance of men to whom life had appeared as a reversible coat, seamy on both sides. "Ain't seen you in about 4 years, Ham," said the seedy man. "Which way you been traveling?" "Texas," said the red-faced man. "It was too cold in Alaska for me, and I found it warm in Texas. I'll tell you about one hot spell I went through there. One morning I steps off the International at a water tank and lets it go on without me. 'Twas a ranch country, not fuller of spite houses than New York City. Only out there they build 'em 20 miles away so that you can't smell what they've got for dinner, instead of running 'em up 2 inches from their neighbors' windows. There wasn't any roads in sight, so I footed it cross country. The grass was shoot up deep, and the mesquite timber looked just like a peach orchard. It was so much like a gentleman's private estate that every minute you expected a kennelful of bulldogs to run out and bite you. But I must have walked 20 miles before I came in sight of a ranch house. It was a little one, about as big as an elevated railroad station. There was a little man in a white shirt and brown overalls, and a pink handkerchief around his neck, rolling cigarettes under a tree in front of the door. "Greetings," says I. "Any refreshment, welcome, emoluments, or even work for a comparative stranger?" "Oh, come in," says he, in a refined tone. "Sit down on that stool, please. I didn't hear your horse coming." "He isn't near enough yet," says I. "I walked. I don't want to be a burden, but I wonder if you have 3 or 4 gallons of water handy." "You do look pretty dusty," says he. "But our bathing arrangements—" "It's a drink I want," says I. "Never mind the dust that's on the outside." He gets me a dipper of water out of a red jar hanging up, and then goes on. "Do you want work?" "For a time," says I. "This is a rather quiet section of the country, isn't it?" "It is," says he. "Sometimes, so I have been told, one sees no human being pass for weeks at a time. I've been here only a month. I bought the ranch from an old settler who wanted to move farther west." "It suits me," says I. "Quiet and retirement are good for a man sometimes. And I need a job. I can tend bar, salt mines, lecture, float stock, do a little middleweight slugging, and play the piano." "Can you herd sheep?" asked the little ranchman. "Do you mean, have I herd sheep?" says I. "Can you herd 'em?" "Take charge of a flock of 'em," says he. "Oh," says I, "now I understand. You mean chase 'em around and bark at 'em like collie dogs. Well, I might," says I. "I've never exactly done any sheep herding, but I've often seen 'em from car windows masticating daisies, and they don't look dangerous." "I'm short a herder," says the ranchman. "You never can depend on the Mexicans. I've only got 2 flocks. You may take out my bunch of muttons. There are only 800 of them, in the morning, if you like. The pay is $12 a month, and your rations furnished. You camp in a tent on the prairie with your sheep. You do your own cooking, but wood and water are brought to your camp. It's an easy job." "I'm on," says I. I'll take the job even if I have to garland my brow and hold on to a crook and wear a loose effect and play on a pipe like the shepherds do in pictures. So the next morning the little ranchman helps me drive the flock of muttons from the corral to about 2 miles out and let them graze on a little hillside on the prairie. He gives me a lot of instructions about not letting bunches of them stray off from the herd and driving them down to a water hole to drink at noon. "I'll bring out your tent and camping stuff and rations in the buckboard before night," says he. "Fine," says I. "Don't forget the rations nor the camping outfit, and be sure to bring the tent. Your name's Zollicoffer, ain't it?" "My name," says he, "is Henry Ogden." "All right, Mr. Ogden," says I. "Mine is Mr. Percival St. Clair. I herded sheep for 5 days on the Rancho Chiquito, and then the wolf entered my soul. That getting to nature certainly got next to me. I was lonesomer than Crusoe's goat. I've seen a lot of persons more entertaining as companions than those sheep were. I drive 'em to the corral and pen 'em every evening. I then cook my cornbread and mutton and coffee. I lie down in a tent the size of a tablecloth and listen to the coyotes and whippoorwills singing around the camp. The fifth evening, after I had corralled my costly but uncongenial muttons, I walked over to the ranch house and stepped in the door. "Mr. Ogden," says I, "you and me have got to get sociable. Sheep are all very well to dot the landscape and furnish $8 cotton suitings for men, but for table talk and fireside companions they rank along with 5 o'clock teasers. If you've got a deck of cards, or a Parcheesi outfit, or a game of authors, get 'em out and let's get on a mental basis. I've got to do something in that intellectual line, if it's only to knock somebody's brains out." This Henry Ogden was a peculiar kind of Frenchman. He wore finger rings and a big gold watch and careful neckties, and his face was calm, and his nose spectacles was kept very shiny. I saw once in Muskogee an outlaw hung for murdering 6 men who was a dead ringer for him, but I knew a preacher in Arkansas that you would have taken to be his brother. I didn't care much for him either way. What I wanted was some fellowship and communion with holy saints or lost sinners. Anything sheepless would do. "Well, St. Clair," says he, laying down the book he was reading, "I guess it must be pretty lonesome for you at first. And I don't deny that it's monotonous for me. Are you sure you corralled your sheep so they won't stray out?" "They're shut up as tight as the jury of a millionaire murderer," says I, "and I'll be back with them long before they'll need their trained nurse." So Ogden digs up a deck of cards, and we play casino. After 5 days and nights of my sheep camp, it was like a toot on Broadway. When I caught big casino, I felt as excited as if I had made a million in Trinity. And when H.O. loosened up a little, I told the story about the lady in the Pullman car. I laughed for 5 minutes. That showed what a comparative thing life is. A man may see so much that he'd be bored to turn his head to look at a $3 million fire, or Joe Weber, or the Adriatic Sea. But let him herd sheep for a spell, and you'll see him splitting his ribs, laughing at "Curfew shall not reign tonight," or really enjoying himself playing cards with ladies. By and by Ogden gets out a decanter of bourbon, and then there is a total eclipse of sheep. "Do you remember reading in the papers about a month ago," says he, "about a train hold up on the M.K.T.? The express agent was shot through the shoulder and about $15,000 in currency taken. And it's said that only one man did the job. Seems to me I do, says I. But such things happen so often they don't linger long in the human Texas mind. Did they overtake, overhaul, seize, or lay hands upon the despoiler? He escaped, says Ogden. And I was just reading in a paper today that the officers have tracked him down into this part of the country. It seems the bills the robber got were all the first issue of the currency to the Second National Bank of Espinosa City. And so they follow the trail where they've been spent, and it leads this way. Ogden pours out some more bourbon and shoves me the bottle. I imagine, says I, after ingurgitating another modicum of the royal booze, that it wouldn't be at all a disingenuous idea for a train robber to run down into this part of the country to hide for a spell. A sheep ranch, now, says I, would be the finest kind of a place. Who'd ever expect to find such a desperate character among these songbirds and muttons and wildflowers? And by the way, says I, kind of looking H. Ogden over, was there any description mentioned of this single-handed terror? Was his lineaments, or height and thickness, or teeth fillings, or a style of habiliments set forth in print? Why, no, says Ogden. They say nobody got a good sight of him because he wore a mask, but they know it was a train robber called Black Bill because he always works alone and because he dropped a handkerchief in the express car that had his name on it. All right, says I approve of Black Bill's retreat to the sheep ranges. I guess they won't find him. There's $1,000 reward for his capture, says Ogden. I don't need that kind of money, says I, looking Mr. Sheepman straight in the eye. The $12 a month you pay me is enough. I need a rest, and I can save up until I get enough to pay my fare to Texarkana, where my widowed mother lives. If Black Bill, I goes on, looking significantly at Ogden, was to have come down this way, say a month ago, and bought a little sheep ranch and Stop, says Ogden, getting out of his chair and looking pretty vicious. Do you mean to insinuate? Nothing, says I. No insinuations. I'm stating a hypodermical case. I say, if Black Bill had come down here and bought a sheep ranch and hired me to, little boy Blue and treated me square and friendly as you've done, he'd never have anything to fear from me. A man is a man, regardless of any complications he may have with sheep or railroad trains. Now you know where I stand. Ogden looks black as camp coffee for 9 seconds, and then he laughs, amused. You'll do, St. Clair, says he. If I was Black Bill, I wouldn't be afraid to trust you. Let's have a game or two of 7-Up tonight. That is, if you don't mind playing with a train robber. I've told you, says I, my oral sentiments, and there's no strings to 'em. While I was shuffling after the first hand, I asks Ogden, as if the idea was a kind of a casualty, where he was from. Oh, says he, from the Mississippi Valley. That's a nice little place, says I. I've often stopped over there, but didn't you find the sheets a little damp and the food poor? No, a hell, says I, from the Pacific Slope. Ever put up there? Too draughty, says Ogden, but if you're ever in the Middle West, just mention my name and you'll get foot warmers, and dripped coffee. "Well," says I wasn't exactly fishing for your private telephone number and the middle name of your aunt that carried off the Cumberland Presbyterian minister. It don't matter. I just want you to know you are safe in the hands of your shepherd. Now don't play hearts on spades, and don't get nervous." "Still harping," says Ogden, laughing again. "Don't you suppose that if I was Black Bill and thought you suspected me, I'd put a Winchester bullet into you and stop my nervousness, if I had any?" "Not any," says I. "A man who's got the nerve to hold up a train single handed wouldn't do a trick like that. I've knocked about enough to know that them are the kind of men who put a value on a friend. Not that I can claim being a friend of yours, Mr. Ogden," says I, "being only your sheep herder, but under more expeditious circumstances we might have been." "Forget the sheep temporarily, I beg," says Ogden. "A cut for deal." About 4 days afterward, while my muttons were nooning on the water hole and I deep in the interstices of making a pot of coffee, up rides softly on the grass a mysterious person in the garb of the being he wished to represent. He was dressed somewhere between a Kansas City detective, Buffalo Bill, and the town dog catcher of Baton Rouge. His chin and eye wasn't molded on fighting lines, so I knew he was only a scout. "Herding sheep?" he asked me. "Well," says I, "to a man of your evident gumptional endowments, I wouldn't have the nerve to say that I am engaged in decorating old bronzes or oiling bicycle sprockets." "You don't talk or look like a sheep herder to me," says he. "But you talk like what you look like to me," says I. And then he asks me who I was working for, and I shows him Rancho Chiquito, 2 miles away in the shadow of a low hill, and he tells me he's a deputy sheriff. "There's a train robber called Black Bill, supposed to be somewhere in these parts," says the scout. "He's been traced as far as San Antonio, and maybe farther. Have you seen or heard of any strangers around here during the past month?" "I have not," says I, "except a report of one over at the Mexican quarters of Loomis's ranch on the Frio." "What do you know about him?" asks the deputy. "He's 3 days old," says I. "What kind of a looking man is the man you'll work for?" he asks. "Does old George Ramey own this place yet? He's run sheep here for the last 10 years, but never had no success." "The old man has sold out and gone west," I tells him. "Another sheep fancier bought him out about a month ago." "What kind of a looking man is he?" asks the deputy again. "Oh," says I, "a big fat kind of a Dutchman with long whiskers and blue specs. I don't think he knows a sheep from a ground squirrel." "I guess old George soaked him pretty well on the deal," says I. After indulging himself in a lot more non communicative information and 2/3 of my dinner, the deputy rides away. That night I mentions the matter to Ogden. "They are drawing the tendrils of the octopus around Black Bill," says I. And then I told him about the deputy sheriff, and how I described him to the deputy, and what the deputy said about the matter. "Oh, well," says Ogden, "let's don't bring any of Black Bill's troubles. We've a few of our own. Get the bourbon out of the cupboard, and we'll drink to his health. Unless," says he, with his little cackling laugh, "you're prejudiced against train robbers." "I'll drink," says I, "to any man who's a friend to a friend. And I believe that Black Bill," I goes on, "would be that. So here's to Black Bill, and may he have good luck." And both of us drank. About 2 weeks later comes shearing time. The sheep had to be driven up the ranch. A lot of frowsy-headed Mexicans would snip the fur off of them with back-action scissors. So the afternoon before the barbers were to come, I hustled my undertone muttons over the hill, across the dell, down by the winding brook, and up to the ranch house. I opened them in a corral and bade them my nightly adieus. I went from there to the ranch house. I find H. Ogden, Esquire, lying asleep on his little cot bed. I guess he had been overcome by anti-insomnia or dyswakefulness or some of the disease peculiar to the sheep business. His mouth and vest were open, and he breathed like a second-hand bicycle pump. I looked at him and gave vent to just a few musings. "Imperial Caesar," says I, "asleep in such a way, might shut his mouth and keep the wind away." A man asleep is certainly a sight to make angels weep. What good is all his brain, muscle, backing, nerve, influence, and family connections? He's at the mercy of his enemies, and more so of his friends, and is about as beautiful as a cab horse leaning against the Metropolitan Opera House at 12:30 a.m., dreaming of the plains of Arabia. Now, a woman asleep you regard as different. No matter how she looks, you know it's better for all hands for her to be that way. Well, I took a drink of bourbon and one for Ogden, and started in to become comfortable while he was taking his nap. He had some books on his table on indigenous subjects such as Japan and drainage and physical culture, and some tobacco, which seemed more to the point. After I'd smoked a few, I'd listened to the sartorial breathing of H.O. I happened to look out the window toward the shearing pens, where there was a kind of a road coming up from a kind of a road across a kind of a creek farther away. I saw 5 men riding up to the house. All of them carried guns across their saddles, and among them was the deputy that had talked to me at my camp. They rode up careful, in open formation, with their guns ready. I set apart with my eye the one I opinionated to be the boss muckraker of this law and order cavalry. "Good evening, gents," says I. "Won't you light and tie your horses?" The boss rides up close and swings his gun over till the opening in it seems to cover my whole front elevation. "Don't you move your hands none," says he, "till you and me indulge in an adequate amount of necessary conversation." "I will not," says I. "I am no deaf mute, and therefore will not have to disobey your injunctions in replying." "We are on the lookout," says he, "for Black Bill, the man that held up the Katy for $15,000 in May. We are searching the ranches and everybody on them. What is your name, and what do you do on this ranch?" "Captain," says I, "Percival St. Clair is my occupation, and my name is Sheep Herder. I've got my flock of veals, no, muttons, penned here tonight. The shearers are coming tomorrow to give them a haircut, with baroom, I suppose." "Where's the boss of this ranch?" the captain of the gang asks me. "Wait just a minute, Cap'n," says I. "Wasn't there a kind of a reward offered for the capture of this desperate character you have referred to in your preamble?" "There's $1,000 reward offered," says the captain, "but it's for his capture and conviction. There don't seem to be no provision made for an informer." "It looks like it might rain in a day or so," says I, in a tired way, looking up at the cerulean blue sky. "If you know anything about the locality, disposition, or secretiveness of this here black bill," says he, in a severe dialect, "you are amiable to the law in not reporting it." "I heard a fence rider say," says I, in a desultory kind of voice, "that a Mexican told a cowboy named Jake over a pigeon store on the Nueces that he heard that Black Bill had been seen in Matamoras by a shipman's cousin 2 weeks ago." "Tell you what I'll do, tight mouth," says the captain, after looking me over for bargains. "If you put us on so we can scoop Black Bill, I'll pay you $100 out of our own pockets. That's liberal," says he. "You ain't entitled to anything. Now, what do you say?" "Cash down now?" I asks. The captain has a sort of discussion with his helpmates, and they all produce the contents of their pockets for analysis. Out of the general results, they figured up $102.30 in cash and $31 worth of plug tobacco. "Come nearer, Captain Mio," says I, "and listen." He so did. "I am mighty poor and low down in this world," says I. "I am working for the $12 a month trying to keep a lot of animals together whose only thought seems to be to get asunder. Although," says I regard myself as some better than the state of South Dakota. It's a come down to a man who has heretofore regarded sheep only in the form of chops. I am pretty far reduced in the world on account of foiled ambitions and rum and the kind of cocktail they make along the P.R.R. all the way from Scranton to Cincinnati. Dredging, French vermouth, one squeeze of a lime, and a good dash of orange bitters. If you're ever up that way, don't fail to let one try you. And again," says I have never yet went back on a friend. I've stayed by 'em when they had plenty, and when adversity's overtaken me, I've never forsook 'em. But," I goes on, "this is not exactly the case of a friend. $12 a month is only bowing acquaintance money, and I do not consider brown beans and cornbread the food of friendship. I am a poor man," says I, "and I have a widowed mother in Texarkana. You will find Black Bill," says I, "lying asleep in this house on a cot in the room to your right. He's the man you want, as I know from his words and conversation. He was, in a way, a friend," I explains. "And if I was the man I once was, the entire product of the mines of Gondola would not have tempted me to betray him. But," says I, "every week half of the beans was wormy and not nigh enough wood in camp. Better go in careful, gentlemen," says I. "He seems impatient at times, and when you think of his late professional pursuits, one would look for abrupt actions if he was come upon sudden." So the whole posse unmounts and ties their horses and unlimbers their ammunition and equipments and tiptoes into the house, and I follows, like Delilah when she set a Philip Staines onto Samson. The leader of the posse shakes Ogden and wakes him up, and then he jumps up, and two more of the reward hunters grab him. Ogden was mighty tough with all his slimness, and he gives them as neat a single-footed tussle against odds as I ever see. "What does this mean?" he says, after they had him down. "You're scooped in, Mr. Blackbill," says the captain. "That's all." "It's an outrage," says H. Ogden. "Madder yet." "It was," says the peace and goodwill man. "The Katy wasn't bothering you, and there's a law against monkeying with express packages." And he sits on H. Ogden's stomach and goes through his pockets systematically and careful. "I'll make you perspire for this," says Ogden, perspiring some himself. "I can prove who I am." "So can I," says the captain, as he draws from H. Ogden's inside coat pocket a handful of new bills of the Second National Bank of Espinosa City. "Your regular engraved Tuesdays and Fridays visiting card wouldn't have a louder voice in proclaiming your indemnity than this here currency. You can get up now and prepare to go with us and expatriate your sins." H. Ogden gets up and fixes his necktie. He says no more after they have taken the money off of him. "A well-greased idea," says the sheriff captain, admiring, "to slip off down here and buy a little sheep ranch, where the hand of man is seldom heard." "'Twas the slickest hideout I ever see," says the captain. So one of the men goes to the shearing pen and hunts up the other herder, a Mexican they call John Sallies, and he saddles up Ogden's horse, and the sheriffs all ride up close around him with their guns in hand, ready to take their prisoner to town. Before starting, Ogden puts the ranch in John Sally's hands and gives him orders about the shearing and where to graze the sheep, as if she intended to be back in a few days. And a couple of hours afterward, one Percival St. Clair, an ex-sheep herder of the Rancho Chiquito, might have been seen with $109 wages and blood money in his pocket, riding south on another horse belonging to said ranch. The red-faced man paused and listened. The whistle of a coming freight train sounded far away among the low hills. The fat, seedy man at his side sniffed and shook his frowsy head slowly and disparagingly. "What is it, Snipey?" asked the other. "Got the blues again?" "No, I ain't," said the seedy one, sniffing again. "But I don't like your talk. You and me have been friends, off and on, for 15 years, and I never yet knew or heard of you giving anybody up to the law. Not no one. And here was a man whose saleratus you had ate, and at whose table you had played games of cards, if casino can be so called. And yet you inform him to the law and take money for it. It never was like you, I say." "This H. Ogden," resumed the red-faced man, "through a lawyer, proved himself free by alibis and other legal terminalities. As I so heard afterward, he never suffered no harm. He did me favors, and I hated to hand him over." "How about the bills they found in his pocket?" asked the city man. "I put 'em there," said the red-faced man, "while he was asleep, when I saw the posse riding up. I was Black Bill. Look out, Snipey. Here she comes. We'll board her on the bumpers when she takes water at the tank." End of the heading of Black Bill. Section 4 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Aaron Walsh, Omaha, Nebraska. Options by O. Henry. Schools and Schools. 1. Old Jerome Warren lived in a $100,000 house at 35 East 50th Sulphur Street. He was a downtown broker, so rich that he could afford to walk for his health a few blocks in the direction of his office every morning, and then call a cab. He had an adopted son, the son of an old friend named Gilbert. Cyril Scott could play him nicely, who was becoming a successful painter as fast as he could squeeze the paint out of his tubes. Another member of the household was Barbara Ross, a step-niece. Man is born to trouble. So, as old Jerome had no family of his own, he took up the burdens of others. Gilbert and Barbara got along swimmingly. There was a tacit and tactical understanding all round that the two would stand up under a floral bell some high noon and promise the minister to keep old Jerome's money in a state of high commotion. But at this point, complications must be introduced. 30 years before, when old Jerome was young Jerome, there was a brother of his named Dick. Dick went west to seek his or somebody else's fortune. Nothing was heard of him until one day old Jerome had a letter from his brother. It was badly written on ruled paper that smelled of salt bacon and coffee grounds. The writing was asthmatic, and the spelling seemed fettuccy. It appeared that instead of Dick having forced fortune to stand and deliver, he had been held up himself and made to give hostages to the enemy. That is, as its letter disclosed, he was on the point of pegging out with a complication of disorders that even whiskey had failed to check. All that his 30 years of prospecting had netted him was one daughter, 19 years old, as per invoice, whom he was shipping east, charges prepaid, for Jerome to clothe, feed, educate, comfort, and cherish for the rest of her natural life, or until matrimony should them part. Old Jerome was a boardwalk. Everybody knows that the world is supported by the shoulders of Atlas, and that Atlas stands on a rail fence, and that the rail fence is built on a turtle's back. Now, the turtle has to stand on something, and that is a boardwalk made of men like old Jerome. I do not know whether immortality shall accrue to men, but if not so, I would like to know when men like old Jerome get what is due them. They met Nevada Warren at the station. She was a little girl, deeply sunburned and wholesomely good-looking, with a manner that was frankly unsophisticated, yet one that not even a cigar drummer would intrude upon without thinking twice. Looking at her, somehow you would expect to see her in a short skirt and leather leggings, shooting glass balls or taming mustangs. But in her plain white waist and black skirt, she sent you guessing again. With an easy exhibition of strength, she swung along a heavy valise, which the uniformed porters tried in vain to wrest from her. "I am sure we shall be the best of friends," said Barbara, pecking at the firm, sunburned cheek. "I hope so," said Nevada. "Dear little niece," said old Jerome, "you are as welcome to my home as if it were your father's own." "Thanks," said Nevada. "And I am going to call you cousin," said Gilbert, with his charming smile. "Take the valise, please," said Nevada. "It weighs 1,000,000 pounds. It's got samples from 6 of Dad's old mines in it." She explained to Barbara, "I calculate they'd say about 9 cents to the 1,000 tons, but I promised him to bring them along." 2. It is a common custom to refer to the usual complication between one man and 2 ladies, or 1 lady and 2 men, or a lady and a man and a nobleman, or any of those problems, as the triangle. But they are never unqualified triangles. they are always isosceles, never equilateral. So, upon the coming of Nevada Warren, she and Gilbert and Barbara Ross lined up into such a figurative triangle, and of that triangle Barbara formed the hypotenuse. One morning, old Jerome was lingering long after breakfast over the dullest morning paper in the city, before setting forth to his downtown flytrap. He had become quite fond of Nevada, finding in her much of his dead brother's quiet independence and unsuspicious frankness. A maid brought in a note for Miss Nevada Warren. "A messenger boy delivered it at the door, please," she said. "He's waiting for an answer." Nevada, who was whistling a Spanish waltz between her teeth and watching the carriages and autos roll by in the street, took the envelope. She knew it was from Gilbert before she opened it by the little gold palette in the upper left-hand corner. Upon tearing it open, she pored over the contents for a while, absorbedly. Then, with a serious face, she went and stood at her uncle's elbow. "Uncle Jerome, Gilbert is a nice boy, isn't he?" "Why, bless the child," said old Jerome, crackling his paper loudly. "Of course he is. I raised him myself. He wouldn't write anything to anybody that wasn't exactly that everybody could know and read, would he?" "I'd just like to see him try it," said Uncle, tearing a handful from his newspaper. "Why, what?" "Read this note he just sent me, Uncle, and see if you think it's all right and proper. You see, I don't know much about city people and their ways." Old Jerome threw his paper down and set both his feet upon it. He took Gilbert's note and fiercely perused it twice, and then a third time. "Why, child," said he, "you had me almost excited, although I was sure of that boy. He's a duplicate of his father, and he was a gilt-edged diamond. He only asks if you and Barbara will be ready at 4 o'clock this afternoon for an automobile drive over to Long Island. I don't see anything to criticize in it except the stationery. I always did hate that shade of blue." "Would it be all right to go?" asked Nevada, eagerly. "Yes, yes, yes, child, of course. Why not? Still, it pleases me to see you so careful and candid. Go, by all means." "I didn't know," said Nevada, demurely. "I thought I'd ask you. Couldn't you go with us, Uncle?" "I? No, 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 no. I've ridden once in a car that boy was driving. Never again. But it's entirely proper for you and Barbara to go. Yes, yes. But I will not. No, 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 no." Nevada flew to the door and said to the maid, "You bet we'll go. I'll answer for Miss Barbara. Tell the boy to say to Mr. Warren, 'You bet we'll go.'" "Nevada," called old Jerome, "pardon me, my dear, but wouldn't it be as well to send him a note in reply? Just a line would do." "No, I won't bother about that," said Nevada, gaily. "Gilbert will understand. He always does. I've never rode in an automobile in my life, but I've paddled a canoe down Little Devil River, through the Lost Horse Canyon, and if it's any livelier than that, I'd like to know." 2 months are supposed to have elapsed. Barbara sat in the study of the $100,000 house. It was a good place for her. Many places are provided in the world where men and women may prepare for the purpose of extricating themselves from diverse difficulties. There are cloisters, waiting places, watering places, confessionals, hermitages, lawyers' offices, beauty parlors, airships, and studies. And the greatest of these are studies. It usually takes a hypotenuse a long time to discover that it is the longest side of a triangle. But it's a long line that has no turning. Barbara was alone. Uncle Jerome and Nevada had gone to the theater. Barbara had not cared to go. She wanted to stay at home and study in the study. If you miss were a stunning newer girl, and saw every other day that a brown, ingenuous Western witch was getting hobbles and a lasso on the young man you wanted for yourself, you too would lose taste for the oxidized silver setting of a musical comedy. Barbara sat by the quartered oak library table, Her right arm rested upon the table, and her dexterous fingers nervously manipulated the sealed letter. The letter was addressed to Nevada Warren, and in the upper left-hand corner of the envelope was Gilbert's little gold palette. It had been delivered at 9 o'clock, after Nevada had left. Barbara would have given her pearl necklace to know what the letter contained, but she could not open and read it by the aid of steam, or a pen handle, or hairpin, or any of the generally approved methods, because her position in society forbade such an act. She had tried to read some of the lines of the letter by holding the envelope up to a strong light and pressing it hard against the paper, but Gilbert had too good a taste in stationery to make that possible. At 11:30 the theater goers returned. It was a delicious winter night, even so far as from the cab to the door they were powdered thickly, with the big flakes downpouring diagonally from the east. Old Jerome growled good-naturedly about villainous cab service and blockaded streets. Nevada, colored like a rose, with sapphire eyes, babbled of the stormy nights in the mountains around Dad's cabin. During all these wintry apostrophes, Barbara, cold at heart, sought wood, the only appropriate thing she could think of to do. Old Jerome went immediately upstairs to hot water bottles and quinine. Nevada fluttered into the study, the only cheerfully lighted room, subsided into an armchair, and, while at the interminable task of unbuttoning her elbow gloves, gave oral testimony as to the demerits of the show. "Yes, I think Mr. Fields is really amusing, sometimes," said Barbara. "Here is a letter for you, dear, that came by the special delivery just after you had gone." "Who is it from?" asked Nevada, tugging at a button. "Well, really," said Barbara with a smile, "I can only guess. The envelope has a queer little thing in one corner that Gilbert calls a palette, but which looks to me rather like a gilt heart on a schoolgirl's valentine." "I wonder what he's writing to me about," remarked Nevada, listlessly. "We're all alike," said Barbara. "All women. We're trying to find out what is in the letter by studying the postmark. As a last resort, I'll use scissors and read it from the bottom upward. Here it is." She made a motion as if to toss the letter across the table to Nevada. "Great catamounts!" exclaimed Nevada. "These centerfire buttons are a nuisance. I'd rather wear buckskins. Oh, Barbara, please shock the height off that letter and read it. It'll be midnight before I get these gloves off." "Why, dear, you don't want me to open Gilbert's letter to you? It's for you, and you wouldn't wish anyone else to read it, of course." Nevada raised her steady, calm sapphire eyes from her gloves. "Nobody writes me anything that everybody mightn't read," she said. "Go on, Barbara. Maybe Gilbert wants us to go out in his car again tomorrow." Curiosity can do more things than kill a cat, and if emotions, well recognized as feminine, are inimical to feline life, then jealousy would soon leave the world catless. Barbara opened the letter with an indulgent, slightly bored air. "Well, dear," said she, "I'll read it if you want me to." She slit the envelope and read the missive with swift traveling eyes, read it again, and cast a quick, shrewd glance at Nevada, who for the first time seemed to consider gloves as the world of her interest, and letters from rising artists as no more than messages from Mars. For a quarter of a minute Barbara looked at Nevada with a strange steadfastness, and then a smile so small that it widened her mouth only the 16th part of an inch, and narrowed her eyes no more than the 20th, flashed like an inspired thought across her face. "Since the beginning, no woman has been a mystery to another woman. Swift as light travels, each penetrates the heart and mind of another, sifts her sister's words of their cunningest disguises, reads her most hidden desires, and plucks the sophistry from her wiliest talk like hairs from a comb, twiddling them sardonically between her thumb and fingers before letting them float away on the breezes of fundamental doubt. Long ago, Eve's son rang the doorbell of the family residence in Paradise Park, bearing a strange lady on his arm whom he introduced. Eve took her daughter-in-law aside and lifted a classic eyebrow. "The land of Nod," said the bride, languidly flirting the leaf of a palm. "I suppose you've been there, of course." "Not lately," said Eve, absolutely unstaggered. "Don't you think the apple sauce they serve over there is execrable? I rather like that mulberry leaf tunic effect, dear, but of course the real fake goods are not to be had over there. Come over behind this lilac bush while the gentleman split a celery tonic. I think the caterpillar holes have made your dress open a little in the back." So then and there, according to the records, was the alliance formed by the only two who's who ladies in the world. Then it was agreed the woman should forever remain as clear as a pane of glass, though glass was yet to be discovered, to other women, and that she should palm herself off on man as a mystery. Barbara seemed to hesitate. "Really, Nevada," she said, with a little show of embarrassment, "you shouldn't have insisted on me opening this. I'm sure it wasn't meant for anyone else to know." Nevada forgot her gloves for a moment. "Then read it aloud," she said. "Since you've already read it, what's the difference? If Mr. Warren has written to me something that anyone else oughtn't to know, that is all the more reason why everybody should know it." "Well," said Barbara, "this is what it says. 'Dearest Nevada, come to my studio at 12 o'clock tonight. Do not fail.'" Barbara rose and dropped the note in Nevada's lap. "I'm awfully sorry," she said. "That I knew. It isn't like Gilbert. There must be some mistake. Just consider that I am ignorant of it, will you, dear? I must go upstairs now. I have such a headache. I'm sure I don't understand the note. Perhaps Gilbert has been dining too well, and will explain. Good night." 4. Nevada tiptoed to the hall and heard Barbara's door close upstairs. The bronze clock in the study told the hour of 12 was 15 minutes away. She ran swiftly to the front door and let herself out into the snowstorm. Gilbert Warren's studio was 6 squares away. By aerial ferry, the white, silent forces of the storm attacked the city from beyond the sullen East River. Already the snow lay a foot deep on the pavements, the drifts heaping themselves like scaling ladders against the walls of the besieged town. The avenue was as quiet as a street in Pompeii. Cabs now and then skimmed past like white-winged gulls over a moonlit ocean, and less frequent motor cars, sustaining the comparison, passed through the foaming waves like submarine boats on their jocund, perilous journeys. Nevada plunged like a wind-driven storm petrel on her way. She looked up at the ragged sierras of cloud-capped buildings that rose above the streets, shaded by the night lights and the congealed vapors to gray, drab, ashen, lavender, dun, and cerulean tints. They were so like the wintry mountains of her western home that she felt a satisfaction such as the $100,000 house had seldom brought her. A policeman caused her to waver on a corner, just by his eye and wait. "Hello, Mabel," said he. "Kind of late for you to be out, ain't it?" I am just going to the drugstore," said Nevada, hurrying past him. The excuse served as a passport for the most sophisticated. Does it prove that women never progresses, or that she sprang from Adam's rib, full-fledged in intellect and wiles? Turning eastward, the direct blast cut down Nevada's speed one half. She made zigzag tracks in the snow, but she was as tough as a pinyon sapling, and bowed to it as gracefully. Suddenly, the studio building loomed before her, a familiar landmark, like a cliff above some well-remembered canyon. The haunt of business and its hostile neighbor, art, was darkened and silent. The elevator stopped at 10. Up 8 flights of Stygian stairs Nevada climbed. and rapped firmly at the door numbered 89. She had been there many times before with Barbara and Uncle Jerome. Gilbert opened the door. He had a crayon pencil in one hand, a green shade over his eyes, and a pipe in his mouth. The pipe dropped to the floor. "Am I late?" asked Nevada. "I came as quick as I could. Uncle and me were at the theater this evening. Here I am, Gilbert." Gilbert did a Pygmalion and Galatea act. He changed from a statue of stupefaction to a young man with a problem to tackle. He admitted Nevada, got a whisk broom, and began to brush the snow from her clothes. A great lamp with a green shade hung over an easel, where the artist had been sketching in crayon. "You wanted me," said Nevada simply, "and I came. You said so in your letter. What did you send me for?" "You read my letter?" inquired Gilbert, sparring for wind. "Barbara read it to me. I saw it afterward. It said, 'Come to my studio at 12 tonight, and do not fail.' I thought you were sick, of course, but you don't seem to be." "Aha!" said Gilbert, irrelevantly. "I'll tell you why I asked you to come, Nevada. I want you to marry me immediately, tonight." "What's a little snowstorm? Will you do it?" "You might have noticed that I would long ago," said Nevada, "and I'm rather stuck on the snowstorm idea myself. I surely would hate one of these flowery church noon weddings, Gilbert. I didn't know you had grit enough to propose it this way. Let's shock him. It's our funeral, ain't it?" "You bet," said Gilbert. "Where did I hear that expression?" He added to himself, "Wait a minute, Nevada. I want to do a little phoning." He shut himself in a little dressing room and called upon the lightnings of the heavens, condensed into unromantic numbers and districts. "That you, Jack? You confounded sleepyhead. Yes, wake up. This is me. Or I. Oh, bother the difference in grammar. I'm going to be married right away. Yes, wake up your sister. Don't answer me back. Bring her along, too. You must. Remind Agnes of the time I saved her from drowning in Lake Ronkonkoma. I know it's caddish to refer to it, but she must come with you. Yes, Nevada is here, waiting. We've been engaged quite a while. Some opposition among the relatives, you know, and we have to pull it off this way. We're waiting here for you. Don't let Agnes out-talk you. Bring her. You will? Good old boy. I'll order a carriage to call for you. Double quick time. Confound you, Jack. You're right." Gilbert returned to the room where Nevada waited. "My old friend Jack Peyton and his sister were to have been here at 11:45, he explained. "But Jack is so confoundedly slow. I've just phoned them to hurry. They'll be here in a few minutes. I'm the happiest man in the world, Nevada. What did you do with the letter I sent you today?" "I've got it cinched here," said Nevada, pulling it out from beneath her opera cloak. Gilbert drew the letter from the envelope and looked it over carefully. Then he looked at Nevada thoughtfully. "Didn't you think it rather queer that I should ask you to come to my studio at midnight?" he asked. "Why, no," said Nevada, rounding her eyes. "Not if you needed me. Out west, when the power sends you a hurry call, ain't that what you say here? We get there first, and talk about it after the roll is over. And it's usually snowing there, too, when things happen, so I didn't mind." Gilbert rushed into another room and came back burdened with overcoats, warranted to turn wind, rain, or snow. "Put this raincoat on," he said, holding it for her. "We have a quarter of a mile to go. Old Jack and his sister will be here in a few minutes." He began to struggle into a raincoat. "Oh, Nevada," he said, "just look at the headlines on the front page of the evening paper on the table, will you? It's about your section of the West, and I know it will interest you." He waited a full minute, pretending to find trouble in the getting on of his overcoat, and then turned. Nevada had not moved. She was looking at him with strange and pensive directness. Her cheeks had a flush on them beyond the color that had been contributed by the wind and snow, but her eyes were steady. "I was going to tell you," she said. "Anyhow, before anything. Dad never gave me a day of schooling. I never learned to read or write a darned word. Now if" pounding their uncertain way upstairs, the feet of Jack the somnolent and Agnes the grateful were heard. 5. When Mr. and Mrs. Gilbert Warren were spinning softly homeward in a closed carriage after the ceremony, Gilbert said, "Nevada, would you really like to know what I wrote you in the letter that you received tonight?" "Fire away," said his bride. "Word for word," said Gilbert. "It was this: 'My dear Miss Warren, you were right about the flower. It was a hydrangea, and not a lilac.'" "All right," said Nevada, "but let's forget it. The joke's on Barbara anyway." End of Schools and Schools. Section 5 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Aaron Walsh, Omaha, Nebraska. Options by O. Henry. Thimble, thimble. These are the directions for finding the office of Carteret and Carteret, Mill Supplies and Leather Belting. You follow the Broadway Trail down until you pass the crosstown line, the bread line, and the dead line, and come to the big canyons of the Money Grubber tribe. Then you turn to the left, to the right, dodge a pushcart at the town of a 2-ton 4-horse dray, and hop, skip, and jump to a granite ledge on the side of a 21-story synthetic mountain of stone and iron. In the 12th story is the office of Carteret and Carteret. The factory where they make the mill supplies and leather belting is in Brooklyn. Those commodities, to say nothing of Brooklyn, not being of interest to you. Let us hold the incidents within the confines of a one-act, one-scene play, thereby lessening the toil of the reader and the expenditure of the publisher. So, if you have the courage to face down 4 pages of type and Carteret and Carteret's office boy, Percival, you shall sit on a varnished chair in the inner office and peep at the little comedy of the old nigger man, the hunting case watch, and the open-faced question, mostly borrowed from the late Mr. Frank Stockton, as you will conclude. First, biography, but paired to the quick, must intervene. I am for the inverted sugar-coated quinine pill, the bitter on the outside. The Carterets were, or was, Columbia College professors, please rule, an old Virginia family. Long time ago, the gentlemen of the family had worn lace ruffles and carried tinless foils and owned plantations and had slaves to burn, but the war had greatly reduced their holdings. Of course, you can perceive at once that this flavor has been shoplifted from Mr. F. Hopkinson Smith, in spite of the act after Carter. Well, anyhow, in digging up the Carteret history, I shall not take you farther back than the year 1620. The 2 original American Carterets came over in that year, but by different means of transportation. One brother, named John, came in the Mayflower and became a Pilgrim Father. You've seen his pictures on the covers of the Thanksgiving magazines, hunting turkeys in the deep snow with a blunderbuss. Blandford Carteret, the other brother, crossed the pond in his own brigantine, landed on the Virginia coast, and became an FFV. John became distinguished for piety and shrewdness in business. Blandford for his pride, juleps, marksmanship, and vast slave cultivated plantations. Then came the Civil War. I must condense this historical interpolation. Stonewall Jackson was shot. Lee surrendered. Grant toured the world. Cotton went to 9 cents. Old Crow whiskey and Jim Crow cars were invented. The 79th Massachusetts Volunteers returned to the 97th Alabama Zouaves the battle flag of Lundy's Lane, which they bought at a second-hand store in Chelsea, kept by a man named Shikoskinski. Georgia sent the president a 60-pound watermelon, and that brings us up to the time when the story begins. My, but that was sparring for an opening. I really must brush up on my Aristotle. The Yankee Carterets went into business in New York long before the war. Their house, as far as leather belting and mail supplies was concerned, was as musty and arrogant and solid as one of those old East India tea importing concerns that you read about in Dickens. There were some rumors of a war behind its counters, but not enough to affect the business. During and after the war, Bluntford Carteret, FFV, lost his plantations, juleps, marksmanship, and life. He bequeathed little more than his pride to his surviving family. So it came to pass that Blandford Carteret V, aged 15, was invited by the leather and mail supplies branch of that name to come north and learn business instead of hunting foxes and boasting of the glory of his fathers on the reduced acres of his impoverished family. The boy jumped at the chance, and, at the age of 25, sat in the office of the firm equal partner with John V of the blunderbuss and turkey branch. Here the story begins again. The young men were about the same age, smooth of face, alert, easy of manner, and with an air that promised mental and physical quickness. They were razored, blue-serged, straw-hatted, and pearl-stick pinned like other young New Yorkers who might be millionaires or bill clerks. One afternoon at 4 o'clock, in the private office of the firm, Blandford Carteret opened a letter that the clerk had just brought to his desk. After reading it, he chuckled audibly for nearly a minute. John looked around from his desk inquiringly. "It's from Mother," said Blandford. "I'll read you the funny part of it. She tells me all the neighborhood news first, of course, and then cautions me against getting my feet wet at musical comedies. After that come vital statistics about calves and pigs and the estimate of the wheat crop. And now I'll quote some. And what do you think? Old Uncle Jake, who was 76 last Wednesday, must go traveling. Nothing would do but he must go to New York and see his young master Blandford. Old as he is, he has a deal of common sense. So I've let him go. I couldn't refuse him. He seemed to have concentrated all his hopes and desires into this one adventure into the wide world. You know he was born on the plantation. It has never been 10 miles away from it in his life. And he was your father's body servant during the war, and has always been a faithful vassal and servant of the family. He has often seen the gold watch, the watch that was your father's and your father's father's. I told him it was to be yours, and he begged me to allow him to take it to you and to put it into your hands himself. So he has it carefully enclosed in a buckskin case, and is bringing it to you with all the pride and importance of a king's messenger. I gave him money for the round trip and for a 2 week stay in the city. I wish you would see to it that he gets comfortable quarters. Jake won't need much looking after. He's able to take care of himself. But I have read in the papers that African bishops and colored potentates generally have much trouble in obtaining food and lodging in the Yankee metropolis. That may be all right, but I don't see why the best hotel there shouldn't take Jake in. Still, I suppose it's a rule. I gave him full directions about finding you. I'd packed his valise myself. You won't have to bother with him, but I do hope you will see that he is made comfortable. Take the watch that he brings to you. It's almost a decoration. It has been worn by true Carterets, and there isn't a stain upon it, nor a false movement of the wheels. Bringing it to you is the crowning joy of old Jake's life. I'd wanted him to have that little outing and that happiness before it is too late. You have often heard us talk about how Jake, pretty badly wounded himself, crawled through the reddened grass at Chancellorsville to where your father lay with the bullet in his dear heart, and took the watch from his pocket to keep it from the Yanks. So, my son, when the old man comes, consider him as a frail but worthy messenger from the old-time life and home. You have been so long away from home and so long among the people that we have always regarded as aliens, that I'm not sure that Jake will know you when he sees you. But Jake has a keen perception, and I rather believe that he will know a Virginia Carteret at sight. I can't conceive that even 10 years in Yankee land could change a boy of mine. Anyhow, I'm sure you will know Jake. I put 18 colors in his valise. If he should have to buy others, he wears a number 15½. Please see that he gets the right ones. He will be of no trouble to you at all. If you are not too busy, I'd like for you to find him a place to board where they have white meal corn bread, and try to keep him from taking his shoes off in your office or on the street. His right foot swells a little, and he likes to be comfortable. If you can spare the time, count his handkerchiefs when they come back from the wash. I bought him a dozen new ones before he left. He should be there about the time this letter reaches you. I told him to go straight to your office when he arrives. As soon as Blandford had finished the reading of this, something happened, as there should happen in stories that must happen on the stage. Percival, the office boy, with his air of despising the world's output of mail supplies and leather belting, came in to announce that a colored gentleman was outside to see Mr. Blandford Carteret. "Bring him in," said Blandford, rising. John Carteret swung around in his chair and said to Percival, "Ask him to wait a few minutes outside. We'll let you know when to bring him in." Then he turned to his cousin with one of those broad, slow smiles that was an inheritance of all the Carterets, and said, "Bland, I've always had a consuming curiosity to understand the differences that you haughty Southerners believe to exist between you all and the people of the North. Of course, I know that you consider yourself made out of finer clay and look upon Adam as only a collateral branch of your ancestry. But I don't know why I never could understand the differences between us." "Well, John," said Blandford, laughing, "what you don't understand about it is just the difference. Of course, I suppose it was the feudal way in which we lived that gave us our lordly baronial airs and feeling of superiority. But you are not feudal now," went on John, Since we licked you and stole your cotton and mules, you've had to go to work just as we damn Yankees, as you call us, have always been doing. And you're just as proud and exclusive and upper classy as you were before the war. So it wasn't your money that caused it." "Maybe it was the climate," said Blandford lightly. "Or maybe our Negroes spoiled us. I'll call old Jakey now. I'll be glad to see the old villain again." "Wait just a moment," said John. "I've got a little theory I want to test. You and I are pretty much alike in our general appearance. Old Jake hasn't seen you since you were 15. Let's have him in and play fair and see which one of us gets the watch. The old darky surely ought to be able to pick out his young master without any trouble. The alleged aristocratic superiority of a rep ought to be visible to him at once. He couldn't make the mistake of handing over the timepiece to a Yankee, of course. The loser buys the dinner this evening, and 2 dozen 15½ collars for Jake. Is it a go?" Blandford agreed heartily. Percival was summoned and told to usher the colored gentleman in. Uncle Jake stepped inside the private office cautiously. He was a little old man, as black as soot, wrinkled and bald, except for a fringe of white wool, cut decorously short, that ran over his ears and around his head. There was nothing of the stage uncle about him. His black suit nearly fitted him, his shoes shone, and his straw hat was banded with a gaudy ribbon. In his right hand he carried something carefully concealed by his closed fingers. Uncle Jake stopped a few steps from the door. Two young men sat in their revolving desk chairs, 10 feet apart, and looked at him in friendly silence. His gaze slowly shifted many times from one to the other. He felt sure that he was in the presence of one, at least, of the revered family among whose fortunes his life had begun and was to end. One had a pleasing but haughty Carteret air. The other had the unmistakable straight, long family nose. Both had the keen black eyes, horizontal brows, and thin, smiling lips that had distinguished both the Carteret of the Mayflower and him of the Brigantine. Old Jake had thought that he could have picked out his young master instantly from 1,000 Northerners, but he found himself in difficulties. The best he could do was to use strategy. "Howdy, Mars Blandford." "Howdy, sir," he said, looking midway between the two young men. "Howdy, Uncle Jake," they both answered pleasantly and in unison. "Sit down. Have you brought the watch?" Uncle Jake chose a hard-bottom chair at respectful distance, sat on the edge of it, and laid his hat carefully on the floor. The watch in its buckskin case he gripped tightly. He had not risked his life on the battlefield to rescue that watch from his old master's foes, to hand it over again to the enemy without a struggle. "Yes, sir. I've got it in my hand, sir. I'm going to give it to you right away in just a minute. Old Missus told me to put it in young Mars Blandford's hand and tell him to wear it for the family pride and honor. It was a mighty lonesome trip for an old nigger man to make. 10,000 miles it must be, back to old Virginia, sir. You've growed mightily, young master. I wouldn't have recognized you but for your powerful resemblance to old master." With admirable diplomacy, the old man kept his eyes roaming in the space between the two men. His words might have been addressed to either, though neither wicked nor perverse. He was seeking for a sign. Blandford and John exchanged winks. "I reckon you done got your ma's letter," went on Uncle Jake. "She said she was going to write to you about my coming along this way." "Yes, yes, Uncle Jake," said John briskly. "My cousin and I have just been notified to expect you. We are both Carterets, you know." "Although one of us," said Blandford, "was born and raised in the North." "So, if you will hand over the watch," said John. "My cousin and I," said Blandford. "Will then see to it," said John. "That comfortable quarters are found for you," said Blandford. With credible ingenuity, old Jake set up a cackling, high-pitched, protracted laugh. He beat his knee, picked up his hat, and bent the brim in an apparent paroxysm of humorous appreciation. The seizure afforded him a mask behind which he could roll his eyes impartially between, above, and beyond his two tormentors. "I sees what?" he chuckled, after a while. "You gentlemen is trying to have fun with the poor old nigger. But you can't fool old Jake. I knowed you, Mars Blandford, the minute I sot eyes on you. You was a poor skimpy little boy, no more than about 14 when you left home to come north. But I knowed you the minute I sot eyes on you. You is the mortal image of the old master. The other gentleman resembles you mightily, sir. But you can't fool old Jake on a member of the old Virginia family. No, sir." At exactly the same time, both Carterets smiled and extended a hand for the watch. Uncle Jake's wrinkled black face lost the expression of amusement to which he had vainly twisted it. He knew that he was being teased, and that it made little real difference, as far as its safety went, into which of those outstretched hands he placed the family rich treasure. But it seemed to him that not only his own pride and loyalty, but much of the Virginia Carterets was at stake. He had heard down south during the war about that other branch of the family that lived in the North and fought on the Uther side, and it had always grieved him. He had followed his old master's fortunes from stately luxury through war to almost poverty, and now, with the last relic and reminder of him, blessed by old Mrs. and entrusted implicitly to his care, he had come 10,000 miles to deliver it into the hands of the one who was to wear it and wind it and cherish it and listen to it take off the unsullied hours that marked the lives of the Carterets of Virginia. His experience and conception of the Yankees had been an impression of tyrants, low down common trash, in blue, laying waste with fire and sword. He had seen the smoke of many burning homesteads, almost as grand as Carteret Hall, ascending to the drowsy southern skies. And now he was face to face with one of them, and he could not distinguish him from his young master, whom he had come to find and bestow upon him the emblem of his kingship, even as the arm clothed in white samite, mystic, wonderful, laid Excalibur in the right hand of Arthur. He saw before him two young men, easy, kind, courteous, welcoming, either of whom might have been the one he sought. Troubled, bewildered, sorely grieved at his weakness of judgment, old Jake abandoned his loyal subterfuges. His right hand sweated against the buckskin cover of the watch. He was deeply humiliated and chastened. Seriously now, His prominent yellow-white eyes closely scanned the two young men. At the end of his scrutiny, he was conscious of but one difference between them. He wore a narrow black tie with a white pearl stickpin. The other's four in hand was a narrow blue one pinned with a black pearl. And then, to old Jake's relief, there came a sudden distraction. Drama knocked at the door with imperious knuckles, and forced comedy to the wings, and Drama peeped with a smiling but sad face over the footlights. Percival, the hater of mail supplies, brought in a card, which he handed with the manner of one bearing a cartel to Blue Tie. Olivia de Ormond, read Blue Tie from the card. He looked inquiringly at his cousin. "Why not have her in," said Black Tie, "and bring matters to a conclusion?" "Uncle Jake," said one of the young men, "would you mind taking that chair over there in the corner for a while? A lady is coming in on some business. We'll take up your case afterward." The lady whom Percival ushered in was young and petulantly, decidedly, freshly, consciously, and intentionally pretty. She was dressed with such expensive plainness that she made you consider lace and ruffles as mere tatters and rags. But one great ostrich plume that she wore would have marked her anywhere in the army of beauty as the wearer of the merry helmet of Navarre. Mr. Ormond accepted a swivel chair at Blue Tie's desk. Then the gentleman drew leather upholstered seats conveniently near and spoke of the weather. "Yes," said she, "I noticed it was warmer. But I mustn't take up too much of your time during business hours. That is," she continued, "unless we talk business." She addressed her words to Blue Tie with a charming smile. "Very well," said he. "You don't mind my cousin being present, do you? We are generally rather confidential with each other, especially in business matters." "Oh, no," caroled Mr. Ormond. "I'd rather he did hear. He knows all about it, anyhow. In fact, he's quite a material witness, because he was present when it happened. I thought you might want to talk things over before, well, any action is taken, as I believe the lawyers say." "Have you anything in the way of a proposition to make?" asked Black Tie. Mr. Ormond looked reflectively at the neat toe of one of her dull kid pumps. "I had a proposal made to me," she said. "If the proposal sticks, it cuts all the proposition. Let's have that settled first." "Well, as far as—" began Blue Tie. "Excuse me, cousin," interrupted Black Tie, "if you don't mind me cutting in." And then she turned, with a good-natured air, toward the lady. "Now, let's recapitulate a bit," he said cheerfully. "All three of us, besides other mutual acquaintances, have been out on a good many larks together." "I'm afraid I'll have to call the birds by another name," said Mr. Ormond. "All right," responded Black Tie with unimpaired cheerfulness. "Suppose we say squabs when we talk about the proposal, and larks when we discuss the proposition. You have a quick mind, Mr. Ormond. 2 months ago some half dozen of us went in a motor car for a day's run into the country. We stopped at a roadhouse for dinner. My cousin proposed my marriage to you then and there. He was influenced to do so, of course, by the beauty and charm which no one can deny that you possess. "Wish I had you for a press agent, Mr. Carteret," said the beauty, with a dazzling smile. "You are on the stage, Mr. Ormond," went on Black Tie. "You have had, doubtless, many admirers, and perhaps other proposals. You must remember, too, that we were a party of merrymakers on that occasion. There were a good many corks pulled. That the proposal of marriage was made to you by my cousin we cannot deny. But hasn't it been your experience that, by common consent, such things lose their seriousness when viewed in the next day's sunlight? Isn't there something of a code among good sports, I use the word in its best sense, that wipes out each day the follies of the evening previous?" "Oh, yes," said Mr. Ormond. "I know that very well, and I've always played up to it. But as you seem to be concluding the case with the silent consent of the defendant, I'll tell you something more. I've got letters from him repeating the proposal, and they're signed, too." "I understand," said Black Tie gravely. "What's your price for the letters?" "I'm not a cheap one," said Mr. Ormond, "but I had decided to make you a rate. You both belong to a swell family. Well, if I am on the stage, nobody can say a word against me truthfully, and the money is only a secondary consideration. It isn't the money I was after. I I believed him, and I liked him." She cast a soft, entrancing glance at Blue Tie from under her long eyelashes. "And the price?" went on Black Tie, inexorably. $10,000, said the lady sweetly. "Or?" "Or the fulfillment of the engagement to marry." "I think it is time," interrupted Blue Tie, "for me to be allowed to say a word or two. You and I, cousin, belong to a family that has held its head pretty high. You have been brought up in a section of the country very different from the one where our branch of the family lived. Yet both of us are Carterets, even if some of our ways and theories differ. You remember it is a tradition of the family that no Carteret ever failed in chivalry to a lady, or failed to keep his word when it was given." Then Blue Tie, with frank decision showing on his countenance, turned to Mr. Ormond. "Olivia," said he, "on what date will you marry me?" Before she could answer, Blue Tie again interposed. "It is a long journey," said he, "from Plymouth Rock to Norfolk Bay. Between the 2 points we find the changes that nearly 3 centuries have brought. In that time the old order has changed. We no longer burn witches or torture slaves, and today we neither spread our cloaks on the mud for ladies to walk over, nor treat them to the ducking stool. It is the age of common sense, adjustment, and proportion. All of us, ladies, gentlemen, women, men, Northerners, Southerners, lords, caitiffs, actors, hot reel drummers, senators, hot carriers, and politicians, are coming to a better understanding. Chivalry is one of our words that changes its meaning every day. Family pride is a thing of many constructions. It might show itself by maintaining a moth-eaten arrogance in a cobwebbed colonial mansion, or by the prompt paying of one's debts. Now, I suppose you've had enough of my monologue. I've learned something of business and a little of life, and I somehow believe, cousin, that our great-great-grandfathers, the original Carterets, would endorse my view of this matter. Black Tie wheeled around to his desk, wrote in the checkbook, and tore out the check, the sharp rasp of the perforated leaf making the only sound in the room. He laid the check within easy reach of Mr. Ormond's hand. "Business is business," said he. "We live in a business age. There is my personal check for $10,000. What do you say, Mr. Ormond? Will it be orange blossoms or cash?" Mr. Ormond picked up the check carefully, folded it indifferently, and stuffed it into her glove. "Oh, this'll do," she said calmly. "I just thought I'd call and put it up to you. I guess you people are all right. But a girl has feelings, you know. I've heard one of you was a Southerner. I wonder which one of you it is." She arose, smiled sweetly, and walked to the door. There, with a flash of white teeth and a dip of the heavy plume, she disappeared. Both of the cousins had forgotten Uncle Jake for the time, but now they heard the shuffling of his shoes as he came across the rock toward them from his seat in the corner. "Young master," he said, "take your watch." And without hesitation, he laid the ancient timepiece in the hand of its rightful owner. End of Thimble Thimble. Recording by Aaron Walsh in Omaha, Nebraska.
Section 6 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tavarish. Options by O. Henry. Supply and Demand. Finch keeps hats cleaned by electricity while you wait. Establishment 9 feet by 12 in 3rd Avenue. Once a customer, you are always his. I do not know his secret process, but every 4 days your hat needs to be cleaned again. Finch is a leathern, sallow, slow-footed man, between 20 and 40. You would say he had been brought up a bushelman in Essex Street. When business is slack, he likes to talk. So I had my hat cleaned even oftener than it deserved, hoping Finch might let me into some of the secrets of the sweatshops. One afternoon I dropped in and found Finch alone. He began to anoint my headpiece de Panama with his mysterious fluid that attracted dust and dirt like a magnet. "They say the Indians weave 'em under water," said I for a leader. "Don't you believe it," said Finch. "No Indian or white man could stay under water that long. Say, do you pay much attention to politics? I see in the paper something about a law they've passed called the Law of Supply and Demand." I explained to him as well as I could that the reference was to a politico-economical law and not to a legal statute. "I didn't know," said Finch. "I heard a good deal about it a year or so ago, but in a one-sided way." "Yes," said I, "political orators use it a great deal. In fact, they never give it a rest. I suppose you heard some of those cart-tail fellows spouting on the subject over here on the East Side." "I heard it from a king," said Finch, "the white king of a tribe of Indians in South America." I was interested, but not surprised. The big city is like a mother's knee to many who have strayed far and found the roads rough beneath their uncertain feet. At dusk they come home and sit upon the doorstep. I know a piano player in a cheap cafe who has shot lions in Africa, a bellboy who fought in the British Army against the Zulus, an express driver whose left arm had been cracked like a lobster's claw for a stew pot of Patagonian cannibals when the boat of his rescuers hove in sight. So a hat cleaner who had been a friend of a king did not oppress me. "A new band?" asked Finch with his dry, barren smile. "Yes," said I, "and half an inch wider." I had had a new band 5 days before. "I meets a man one night," said Finch, beginning his story, "a man brown as snuff, with money in every pocket, eating Schweinerknuckel in Schlagels. That was 2 years ago, when I was a hose cart driver for number 98. His discourse runs to the subject of gold. He says that certain mountains in a country down south that he calls Gaudimala is full of it. He says the Indians wash it out of the streams in plural quantities." "Oh, Geronimo," says I, "Indians? There's no Indians in the South," I tell him, "except Elks, Maccabees, and the buyers for the fall dry goods trade. The Indians are all on the reservations," says I. "I'm telling you this with reservations," says he. "They ain't Buffalo Bill Indians. They're squattier and more pedigreed. They call 'em Inkers and Aspics. And they was old inhabitants when Mazuma was king of Mexico. They wash the gold out of the mountain streams," says the brown man, "and fill quills with it. And then they empty 'em into red jars till they are full. And then they pack it in buckskin sacks of 1 arroba each, an arroba is 25 pounds, and store it in a stone house with an engraving of a idol with marcelled hair playing a flute over the door." "How do they work off this unearth increment?" I asks. "They don't," says the man. "It's a case of ill fares the land with a great deal of velocity, where wealth accumulates and there ain't any reciprocity." After this man and me got through our conversation, which left him dry of information, I shook hands with him and told him I was sorry I couldn't believe him. And a month afterward, I landed on the coast of this Guatemala with $1,300 that I had been saving up for 5 years. I thought I knew what Indians liked, and I fixed myself accordingly. I loaded down 4 pack mules with red woolen blankets, wrought iron pails, jeweled side combs for the ladies, glass necklaces, and safety razors. I hired a black mozo, who was supposed to be a mule driver and an interpreter too. It turned out that he could interpret mules all right, but he drove the English language much too hard. His name sounded like a Yale key when you push it in wrong side up, but I called him McClintock, which was close to the noise. Well, this gold village was 40 miles up in the mountains, and it took us 9 days to find it. But one afternoon McClintock led the other mules and myself over a rawhide bridge stretched across a precipice 5,000 feet deep, it seemed to me. The hoofs of the beasts drummed on it just like before George M. Cohen makes his first entrance on the stage. This village was built of mud and stone and had no streets. Some few yellow and brown persons popped their heads out of doors looking about like Welsh rabbits with Worcester sauce on them. Out of the biggest house, that had a kind of a porch around it, steps a big white man, red as a beet in color, dressed in fine tanned deerskin clothes, with a gold chain around his neck, smoking a cigar. I've seen United States senators of his style of features and build, also head waiters and cops. He walks up and takes a look at us, while McClintock disembarks and begins to interpret to the lead mule while he smokes a cigarette. "Hello, Buttinsky," says the fine man to me. "How did you get in the game? I didn't see you buy any chips. Who gave you the keys of the city?" "I'm a poor traveler," says I, "especially muleback. You'll excuse me. Do you run a hack line or only a bluff?" "Segregate yourself from your pseudo-equine quadruped," says he, "and come inside." He raises a finger and the villager runs up. "This man will take care of your outfit," says he, "and I'll take care of you." He leads me into the biggest house and sets out the chairs and a kind of a drink the color of milk. It was the finest room I ever saw. The stone walls was hung all over with silk shawls, and there was red and yellow rugs on the floor, and jars of red pottery, and Angora goat skins, and enough bamboo furniture to misfurnish half a dozen seaside cottages. "In the first place," says the man, "you want to know who I am. I am sole lessee and proprietor of this tribe of Indians. They call me the Grand Yakuma, which is to say king or main finger of the bunch. I've got more power here than a charge d'affaires, a charge of dynamite, and a charge account at Tiffany's combined. In fact, I'm the big stick, with as many extra knots on it as there is on the record run of the Lusitania. Oh, I read the papers now and then," says he. "Now let's hear your entitlements," he goes on, "and the meeting will be open." "Well," says I am known as one W.D. Finch, occupation capitalist, address 541 East 32nd, New York," chips in the noble Grand. "I know," says he, grinning. "It ain't the first time you've seen it go down on the blotter. I can tell by the way you hand it out. Well, explain, capitalist." I tell this boss plain what I come for and how I come to came. "Gold dust?" says he, looking as puzzled as a baby that's got a feather stuck on its molasses finger. "That's funny. This ain't a gold mining country. And you invested all your capital on a stranger's story? Well, well, these Indians of mine, they are the last of the tribe of Peshas, are simple as children. They know nothing of the purchasing power of gold. I'm afraid you've been imposed on," says he. "Maybe so," says I, "but it sounded pretty straight to me." "W.D.," says the king all of a sudden, "I'll give you a square deal. It ain't often I get to talk to a white man, and I'll give you a show for your money. It may be these constituents of mine have a few grains of gold dust hid away in their clothes. Tomorrow you may get out these goods you've brought up and see if you can make any sales. Now I am going to introduce myself unofficially. My name is Shane, Patrick Shane. I own this tribe of Peche Indians by right of conquest, single-handed and unafraid. I drifted up here 4 years ago and won 'em by my size and complexion and nerve. I learned their language in 6 weeks. It's easy. You simply emit a string of consonants as long as your breath holds out, and then point at what you're asking for. I conquered them spectacularly, goes on King Shane, and then I went at 'em with economical politics, law, sleight of hand, and a kind of New England ethics and parsimony. Every Sunday, or as near as I can guess at it, I preach to 'em in the council house, I'm the council, on the law of supply and demand. I praise supply and knock demand. I use the same text every time. You wouldn't think, W.D., says Shane, that I had poetry in me, would you? Well, says I wouldn't know whether to call it poetry or not. Tennyson, says Shane, furnishes the poetic gospel I preach. I always considered him the boss poet. Here's the way the text goes. For not to admire, if a man could learn it, were more than to walk all day like a sultan of old in a garden of spice. You see, I teach him to cut out demand, that supply is the main thing. I teach him not to desire anything beyond their simplest needs, a little mutton, a little cocoa, and a little fruit brought up from the coast. That's all they want to make 'em happy. I've got them well trained. They make their own clothes and hats out of vegetable fiber and straw, and they're a contented lot. It's a great thing, winds up Shane, to have made a people happy by the incultivation of such simple institutions. Well, the next day, with the king's permission, I has the McClintock open up a couple of sacks of my goods in the little plaza of the village. The Indians swarmed around by the hundred and looked the bargain counter over. I shook red blankets at them, flashed finger rings and ear bobs, tried pearl necklaces and side combs on the women, and a line of red hosiery on men. 'Twas no use. They looked on like hungry graven images, but I never made a sale. I asked McClintock what was the trouble. Mac yawned 3 or 4 times, rolled a cigarette, made 1 or 2 confidential side remarks to a mule, and then condescended to inform me that the people had no money. Just then strolls up King Patrick, big and red and royal as usual, with a gold chain over his chest and his cigar in front of him. "How's business, W.D.?" he asks. "Fine," says I. "It's a bargain de rush. I've got 1 more line of goods to offer before I shut up shop. I'll try 'em with safety razors. I've got 2 gross that I bought at a fire sale." Shane laughs till some kind of marmaluke of private secretary he carries with him has to hold him up. "Oh, my sainted Aunt Jerusha," says he, "ain't you one of the babes in the goods, W.D.? Don't you know that no Indians ever shave? They pull out their whiskers instead." "Well," says I, "that's just what these razors would do for 'em. They wouldn't have any kick coming if they used 'em once." Shane went away, and I could hear him laughing a block if there had been any block. "Tell 'em," says I to McClintock, "it ain't money I want. Tell 'em I'll take gold dust. Tell 'em I'll allow 'em $16 an ounce for it in trade. That's what I'm out for, the dust." Mac interprets, and you'd have thought a squadron of cops had charged the crowd to disperse it. Every uncle's nephew and aunt's niece of 'em faded away inside of 2 minutes. At the royal palace that night, me and the king talked it over. "They've got the dust hid out somewhere," says I, "or they wouldn't have been so sensitive about it." "They haven't," says Shane. "What's this gag you've got about gold? You've been reading Edward Allan Poe? They ain't got any gold." "They put it in quills," says I, "and then they empty it in jars, and then into sacks of 25 pounds each. I got it straight." "W.D.," says Shane, laughing and chewing his cigar, "I don't often see a white man, and I feel like putting you on. I don't think you'll get away from here alive anyhow, so I'm going to tell you. Come over here." He draws aside a silk fiber curtain in a corner of the room and shows me a pile of buckskin sacks. 40 of them," says Shane. 1 arroba in each one. In round numbers, $220,000 worth of gold dust you see there. It's all mine. It belongs to the Grand Yakuma. They bring it all to me. $220,000. Think of that, you glass bead peddler," says Shane, "and all mine. Little good it does you, says I contemptuously and hatefully. And so you are the government depositor of this gang of moneyless money-makers? Don't you pay enough interest on it to enable one of your depositors to buy an Augusta, Maine Pullman carbon diamond worth $200 for $4.85? Listen, says Patrick Shane with the sweat coming out on his brow. I am confident with you, as you have somehow enlisted my regards. Did you ever, he says, feel the avoirdupois power of gold? Not the troy weight of it, but the 16 ounces to the pound force of it. Never, says I. I never take in any bad money. Shane drops down on the floor and throws his arms over the sacks of gold dust. I love it, says he. I want to feel the touch of it day and night. It's my pleasure in life. I come in this room and I'm a king and a rich man. I'll be a millionaire in another year. The pile's getting bigger every month. I've got the whole tribe washing out the sands in the creeks. I'm the happiest man in the world, WD. I just want to be near this gold and know it's mine, and it's increasing every day. Now you know, says he, why my Indians wouldn't buy your goods. They can't. They bring all the dust to me. I'm their king. I've taught them not to desire or admire. You might as well shut up shop. I'll tell you what you are, says I. You're a plain contemptible miser. You preach supply and you forget demand. Now supply, I goes on, is never anything but supply. On the contrary, says I, demand is a much broader syllogism. An assertion. Demand includes the rights of our women and children and charity and friendship and even a little begging on the street corners. They've both got to harmonize equally, and I've got a few things up my commercial sleeve yet, says I, that may jostle your preconceived ideas of politics and economy. The next morning I had McClintock bring up another mule load of goods to the plaza and open it up. The people gathered around the same as before. I got out the finest line of necklaces, bracelets, hair combs, and earrings that I carried, and had the women put them on. And then I played trumps. Out of my last pack I opened up a half gross of hand mirrors with solid tinfoil backs and passed them round among the ladies. That was the first introduction of looking glasses among the Peche Indians. Shane walks by with his big laugh. "Business looking up any?" he asks. "It's looking at itself right now," says I. By and by a kind of a murmur goes through the crowd. The women had looked into the magic crystal and seen that they were beautiful, and was confiding the secret to the men. The men seemed to be urging the lack of money and the hard times just before the election, but their excuses didn't go. Then was my time. I called McClintock away from an animated conversation with his mules and told him to do some interpreting. "Tell him," says I, "that gold dust will buy for them these befitting ornaments for kings and queens of the earth. Tell him the yellow sand they wash out of the waters of the high sanctified Ayakame and chop suey of the tribe will buy the precious jewels and charms that will make them beautiful and preserve and pickle them from evil spirits. Tell him the Pittsburgh banks are paying 4% interest on deposits by mail, while this get-rich-frequently custodian of the public funds ain't even paying attention. Keep telling him, Mac," says I, "to let the Gold Dust family do their work. Talk to him like a born anti-Bryanite," says I. "Remind him that Tom Watson's gone back to Georgia," says I. McClintock waves his hand affectionately at one of his mules and then hurls a few stickfuls of minion type at the mob of shoppers. A gutta-percha Indian man, with a lady hanging on his arm with 3 strings of my fish-scale jewelry and imitation marble beads around her neck, stands up on a block of stone and makes a talk that sounds like a man shaking dice in a box to feel aces and sixes. He says McClintock, that the people not know that gold dust will buy their things. The women very mad. The Grand Yakuma tell him it no good but for keep to make bad spirits keep away. You can't keep bad spirits away from money, says I. They say, goes on McClintock, the Yakuma fool them. They raise plenty row. Going, says I. Gold dust or cash takes the entire stock. The dust weighed before you and taken at $16 the ounce, the highest price on the Guatemala coast. Then the crowd disperses all of a sudden, and I don't know what's up. Mac and me packs away the hand mirrors and jewelry they had handed back to us, and we had the mules back on the corral they had set apart for our garage. While we was there, we hear great noises of shouting, and down across the plaza runs Patrick Shane, hotfoot with his clothes ripped half off and scratches on his face like a cat had fought him hard for every one of its lives. "They're looting the treasury, W.D.," he sings out. "They're going to kill me and you too. Unlimber a couple of mules at once. We'll have to make a getaway in a couple of minutes." "They've found out," says I, "the truth about the law of supply and demand." "It's the women mostly," says the king, "and they used to admire me so." "They hadn't seen looking glasses then," says I. "They've got knives and hatchets," says Shane. "Hurry." "Take that roan mule," says I. "You and your law of supply. I'll ride the dun, for he's 2 knots per hour the faster. The roan has a stiff knee, but he may make it," says I. "If you'd included reciprocity in your political platform, I might have given you the dun," says I. Shane and McClintock and me mounted our mules and rode across the rawhide bridge just as the Peshas reached the other side and began firing stones and long knives at us. We cut the thongs that held up our end of the bridge and headed for the coast. A tall, bulky policeman came into Finch's shop at that moment and leaned an elbow on the showcase. Finch nodded at him friendly. "I heard down at Casey's," said the cop in rumbling, husky tones, "that there was going to be a picnic at the Head Cleaners Union over at Bergen Beach Sunday. Is that right?" "Sure," said Finch. "There'll be a dandy time." "Give me 5 tickets," said the cop, throwing a $5 bill on the showcase. "Why," said Finch, "ain't you going it a little too—" "Go to—" said the cop. "You've got 'em to sell, ain't you? Somebody's got to buy 'em. Wish I could go along." I was glad to see Finch so well thought of in his neighborhood. And then in came a wee girl of 7, with dirty face and pure blue eyes and a smudged and insufficient dress. "Mama says," she recited shrilly, "that you must give me 80 cents for the grocer and 19 for the milkman and 5 cents for me to buy hokey pokey with. But she didn't say that," the elf concluded with a hopeful but honest grin. Finch shelled out the money, counting it twice, but I noticed that the total sum that the small girl received was $1.04. "That's the right kind of law," remarked Finch, as he carefully broke some of the stitches of my hatband so that it would assuredly come off within a few days. "The law of supply and demand. But they've both got to work together. I'll bet," he went on with his dry smile, "she'll get jelly beans with that nickel. She likes 'em. What's supply if there's no demand for it? Whatever became of the king? I asked curiously. Oh, I might have told you, said Finch. That was Shane came in and bought the tickets. He came back with me, and he's on the force now. End of Supply and Demand.